Hey everybody, how you doing tonight? So good to be here with all of you. Welcome, 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 welcome. So glad to be here with all of you. Be sure to hit the like button, be sure to hit the subscribe button, be sure to hit the notifications bell. I always say it that way, the notifications bell. The notifications bell, the notifications bell. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. We're going to have a great time tonight. It's going to be a great conversation. Got a few things to talk to you all about. Woo! A lot of good stuff going on. A lot of bad stuff happening in this world, of course, but we press on. We resist. All right, everybody, strap in. We're going to have a great chat here tonight.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just is the byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
All right, everybody, welcome, welcome, welcome. So, wild times we are living in. I'll tell you one thing I don't want to talk about, and that is the Will Smith slap. I am not interested in talking about that. I have no comments on that. If you super chat me about the Will Smith slap, I will not answer it. I will take super chats on anything else for the most part, within reason. But I don't want to talk about the Will Smith. Don't want to talk about the Will Smith slap. I will talk about MK Ultra, Scientology, and mind control cults. We can talk about that a little bit. I mean, I wouldn't use that language exactly, but MK Ultra, Scientology, and mind control cults. All right, we'll talk about that. All right. Where is the CPI merch? Well, CPI merch, that's a fair question. The way this works, for those of you who might be new, is I give my opening remarks, my prepared opening remarks. It's like a trial. I give my prepared opening statement, and then we do the roll call where I call you out as I see you, names and locations. And then from there, I just answer your questions, your super chat questions for the rest of the show. And that's how it works. Great video on Mumia. Great. I'm glad you liked it. I wish more people could see it. YouTube won't let me monetize it for some reason. Very odd. Very, very odd. You know, I make videos about Russia. They don't care. But a video about Mumia Abu Jamal, a U.S. domestic political thing, they won't let me monetize that video. Very odd. But thank you for that. There you go. And but so the second half of the show is just me answering your super chat questions. So if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, I will do it. So that's the plan there. I want to tell you all, I am thrilled. Last night I had a great conversation with Jimmy Dore. It was amazing. It was just a lovely chat. We first started talking about Russia and Ukraine. And then from there, effects of average American in the daily life if the dollar collapses. Okay. Thanks. In daily life, if the dollar collapses. All right. Wrote it down. And it was great. The only thing that could have been better is my face was red. I am a red-faced Irishman, right? I don't know if you know about this, but we Irish Americans, we suffer from having, red faces, right? And me, I got my red hair and I've got fair skin, and my face was just burning red last night. I don't know what it was, especially right now, the springtime. My face is just red as hell. I don't know what it is. And this light that I've got on my webcam, it actually minimizes it, so my face isn't as badly red. But for some reason, last night with the lighting, I was red as hell. And no, I was not drinking alcohol. I don't drink alcohol, so that was not a factor. But yeah, my face was just bright red, but that's okay because they say, I don't know if this is true, but when men speak on television, right? I guess our audiences are very sexist. When men speak on television, people just kind of listen to their voices. They don't look at them. It's women who get judged by their appearance. That's kind of how people are. I guess people are bigoted and they have sexist, chauvinist attitudes. So as long as people weren't looking at my bright red face that was just bright and red the whole time, which, whew, that was one red face. I hope he interviews me in like the winter sometime. He interviews me in the summer, but yeah, you interview me in springtime, my face is going to be bright red. But it was still an amazing chat. It was still a great conversation. I feel great about it. I feel very good about it. So we first started talking about Ukraine and Russia, and that part's already posted on his YouTube channel. Lesser known leftist figures that everyone should know. Oh, it sounds like a book title. Lesser known leftist figures that everyone should know. All right. And what was I saying? Oh gosh, what was I saying? Anyway, so we first started talking about Russia and Ukraine, and then from there, we started talking about the BreadTube book. He actually had a copy of BreadTube Serves Imperialism. And we got to talking, and it was a great back and forth. We were joking. I talked about how the BreadTubers went after him for interviewing a Bugaloo boy. We talked about how it seems like Young Turks and the BreadTubers follow the same script. BreadTube is aimed at like 20-year-olds. It's a much more juvenile thing, whereas the stuff from Young Turks is kind of trying to be a news outlet, trying to be a liberal commentary show, but they basically have the same script, which is sounding kind of left wing and radical until it actually matters. That was a great conversation. It was really, really great. So I'm sure more of it. I think it's your red shirt. Oh, well, there you go. Last night I was not wearing a red shirt. Right now I'm wearing a red shirt, but there you go. But it was a great conversation between me and Jimmy Dore. I'm really glad it happened. Really thrilled that it happened. It was absolutely tremendous. And yeah, we're going to do more of that, folks, more of that. I hope to engage with Jimmy Dore for a long time. I've been a huge fan of the Jimmy Dore program for a long time, and we just had a great conversation, and that was really awesome. You were on fire on Dore's show. So red was a good theme. Oh, well, thank you, Chris. You're the best. You're the best, Chris Morlock, and you got William Z. Foster as your icon there. So I have to believe everything you say. So there you go. Great stuff. Great stuff. Great stuff. So I had a couple things I was going to talk about on here. Couple things I was going to talk about, and I was thinking that maybe I would do that thing today where I open it up and I let people jump on. It's always a little bit of a risk to do that. Always a bit of a risk. But I might open it up. I got a couple like clips I want to show. Ever considered interviewing people on the street? I do that all the time, actually. That's part of my RT work. I do Vox Pops, where you go out on the street and you just interview people. And there's all kinds of videos of me interviewing people about all kinds of stuff. And before, I did that for Press TV for a while as well. I would interview people on the street, and I'm good at it. That's one thing I'm quite good at. A lot of people get very nervous interviewing, doing like man on the street interviews, and it can be a little scary sometimes. You want to I would never do it by myself, right? I think people would be weirded out if I did it, by myself. But you want to have a cameraman with you, and then you just say, hey, folks, want to answer a question for the news? And yeah, I do that a lot. And it's really good because you get in touch. Sometimes social media can help you live in a bubble, right? Oh, it's up on Rumble. Very good. Very, very good. Sometimes social media, sometimes social media can keep you in a bubble. So it's really good to just go out. Oh, thank you, Cyrus. Much appreciated. And sometimes you can be in a little bit of a bubble, right? So when you go out and interview people on the street, you're a little more down to earth. You hear what average folks are saying, and when you do man on the street interviews, you're not there to argue with them. If you argue with people, you can't do that. And you can press them a little bit. But you got to be careful when you're interviewing people on the street, because if you're going out on the street to argue with people, people are just going to walk away. man on the street, the whole point of a man on the street conversation is you want to ask people what they think. That's how you do a man on the street interview. So I might do that. But anyway, what I was saying was that I might open it up. I might actually open it up today. I might open it up today, and just let people come on, let you come on. So if you're somebody who wants, you got a webcam on your phone or on your computer and you're willing to show your face and you're not going to be a jackass, I will let you come on today. I think I will drop the link after I've gotten through what I want to show you. I think I will drop the link in the chat. I think that's how we're going to do it. So that'll be the second half of my opening remarks. Will be me dropping the link in the chat and letting a few people, 3, 4, 5, maybe 5 at the most, people come in and just tell me what's on their minds. So if you are one of those people, it'll be a race, right? I'll drop the link in the chat to the StreamYard. I'll bring you on. Keep in mind, if you have your face covered up, I'm not going to bring you on. If you look creepy, I'm not going to bring you on. But if you just look like somebody who wants to come chat, I'll bring you on. And if it gets weird, if somebody comes on and does something weird or something, I'm just removing you immediately. But for the most part, yeah, we'll just we can do that. I like having people on the chat. I really do. I really love having people on. It always goes well when we have people on. I will say, up to this point, there's not been any funny business when I brought people on. Not that couldn't change, but at this point, so I think we might do that pretty soon after I finish my opening remarks. But anyhow, one thing, now that we're doing it this way, where I'm using my webcam and streaming and all of that, one thing I thought about was that, back in the day when I first started this YouTube channel, over a decade ago, I think, when I first started this YouTube channel, yeah, well over a decade ago, I think it was 2008, I started this YouTube channel. At one point, I was compiling a lot of historical clips from important lessons in the class struggle, because really what I was trying to get at, and came up in the conversation with Jimmy Dore, is that there is a tradition of class struggle and there is a tradition of revolutionary politics. I didn't invent this. I didn't invent this. You didn't invent this. This is a long tradition. And part of what makes these conversations so special is we talk about the revolutionary movement in Detroit in the 1970s. We talk about, the foundations of Christianity by Karl Kautsky and the traditions of Christian socialism and Michael Parenti and stuff like that. We talk about these things, right? And I talk about William Z. Foster, and I talk about Gus Hall, and I talk about Huey Newton and the Black Panthers, and we talk about the revolutionary socialist movement, and that we really make clear that being a communist, being a socialist, is not being a liberal. What liberals believe and what we believe are polar opposites, right? We may agree on some issues, and we may agree on some sentiments, like being against racism or being against the oppression of women, but we have a very different worldview. We are not liberals. We want a whole new society where the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve public good and not the profits of a few. We do believe in objective truth and objective reality. We do not believe everything is a matter of opinion. We do believe in objective reality. And I've often compared it this way. I've said that ideology is like this. If you're driving a car, imagine that you're driving a car. And when you drive your car, you know where you came from, you know where you're going, and you know how you're getting there. And that's the role that ideology plays in your life. It tells you who you are, where you came from, and where you were going, and how to get there. And that's called ideology. And it plays that role. It says you are who you are in human society. You came from here, you're getting here, and this is how you're getting there. That is the role that ideology plays. And what is criminal about liberalism? Right? Conservatism is a false ideology. Conservatism, that capitalism is the greatest system that has ever existed, that if you don't like it here, move to another country, that racism is just something made up by minorities. There's no such thing as racism, that that all the other countries around the world want to be just like the United States, that conservatism is a toxic ideology. It's false ideology. But liberalism is is the opposite problem. It is not ideology. It is the absence of ideology. Liberalism comes along and says, well, there really is no truth. There really is no truth. Everything's a matter of opinion. Everything's open to interpretation. It takes apart the conservative ideology, which is good, but it doesn't replace it with anything. The ideology is not replaced with anything. And so what that leads to is you have a bunch of people that are, have a false conception of where they came from. They have a false conception of where they're going. They have a false conception of how they got there. But instead of replacing that false conception with truth, what you do is you just tell them there is no truth. So imagine that you're driving down the road one day. And all of a sudden, you don't know where you came from. And you don't know where you're going. And you don't know how you're getting there. You just know that you were at the wheel of your car and you got no effing clue what you're doing. That's what's happening in America right now. And that's why so many young people are turning to drugs and opioids. That's why so many young people are committing suicide. That's why our culture is just in a mess. It's because liberalism is all about deconstruction. But it's not about building. It is a vandal tendency. It's about tearing things down. And liberalism does not replace the previously existing ideology with a true ideology, with a materialist conception of history. Marxism says that you are a worker and you are exploited by capitalists, and the capitalists control the country, but you are engaging in a class struggle so that you and other workers can overthrow the capitalists and seize control of the means of production and organize the economy rationally so that poverty and scarcity can be eradicated and we can move toward a society in which there is abundance. And there's so much abundance that the difference between classes and inequality can fade away. The need for a government can fade away. That the artificial restraints imposed on production by the profit system and the rule of profits and the lack of overall planning can be eliminated. And we can get to a society that is egalitarian, stateless, classless, based on vast material abundance, right? That is the goal. And that the proletariat, the working class, has everything to gain from the proletariat rising up and seizing control of the means of production. And when the banks, factories, and industries are no longer organized to serve the profits of a wealthy few, but when they are organized in a rational way, when, as Frederick Engels puts it, production upon a predetermined plan becomes henceforth possible, at that point, human beings can soar to even greater heights. And so if you understand that you are a working class person, you're living in the center of the empire, but ultimately you and the people of the colonized world have the same overall interest, which is dismantling imperialism and reorganizing society in a rational way with a rational economy. And that will ultimately lead to a stateless, classless world of vast abundance. If you can think that way, right, and think that, then you know where you came from as a proletarian, that before we had capitalism, we had feudalism. Before we had feudalism, we had slavery. Before we had slavery, we had hunter-gatherer civilization. You know where you're going, which is eventually to socialism and dismantling imperialism, and eventually to that ultimate goal of a stateless, classless world, the higher stage of communism. You know how we're getting there by bringing working people together and finding out what we have in common and building combinations and communities of solidarity. And you can speed right ahead on that car. And I'll tell you, I hate to get all sentimental here, but if it had not been for this ideology, I might have stopped driving the car. I might not be here today. Communism saved my life. I'm just being real with you. I am being absolutely real with you. When I was a teenager, it was really funny. When I was a kid, I believed that the United States was the greatest country in the world. That's what I really believed when I was a kid. America is the greatest country in the world. And, I just believed that America was the greatest country in the world. And I actually remember when I was like a small kid, I was riding with my mother in the car. And I remember my mother had a song on the radio. It was about like Central America or something. And I asked my mother what was going on, what was the song about, and she basically said, "Okay, well, the U.S." She basically tried to explain it in the way you would explain it to a child. And I said, "So you mean America is doing something wrong?" And I was just in utter shock because America never does anything wrong. That's how I understood it. America was right in World War II. America was right in the Korean War. America was right in the Vietnam War. America was right in World War I. America was right in the Civil War. America was right in the Revolutionary War. But my mother was telling me that it seemed like maybe America was in the wrong. And I couldn't even stand to think about it anymore because America never does anything wrong. That's what I believe. And when I was in fourth grade, my mother went on strike as a librarian, and I walked the picket lines with her. So I learned what a union was, and I learned about the labor movement. I didn't know anything about that. But then, as I got to be a teenager, I started to really question things. And 9/11 happened, and I was very uncomfortable with the wave of patriotism. I mean, my little town in Ohio after 9/11, it just turned into this and never ending 24/7 pro war, support the troops, bomb the Arabs rally. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was pretty horrible. And they kept saying that we've been attacked because of our freedom. And I remember thinking, like, that doesn't make any sense. And like my family, we had hosted an exchange student from Pakistan, right? That we had just been his like host family in the United States. He didn't live with us, but he was at a local college, and we'd hosted him. And after 9/11, all these people at my school were saying, "Oh my God, did you know, Caleb and his family, they know Muslims. They actually know someone who's not a Christian. They're a Muslim." And I was like, we were under huge suspicion in my little town because God forbid, we had known somebody who wasn't a Christian, who was a Muslim, and that got me thinking. Oh, okay, we'll talk about that too. Molotov Ribbentrop. All right. Um, and that got me thinking. And basically, when the USA went to invade Iraq, I was smart enough to realize that Osama bin Laden. I could open a book. I could Google. Google was around, and Osama bin Laden was a Saudi Wahhabi Islamic extremist, fundamentalist, and Saddam Hussein was a Ba'ath socialist, a secular Arab nationalist. And the idea that Saddam Hussein was responsible for 9/11 was bull honking. And the idea that somehow 9/11 meant we had to invade Iraq was just a bunch of bull honking. It was just malarkey. I mean, I wasn't. I would have been how old? I would have been like 13, 14 at the time, but it just didn't make any sense. And everyone in my town insisted, no, all of them are in there together. All those Arabs are working together. And I'm like, no, they're not working together. And the Saudis, all the stuff, that we talk about and demonize Islam over, the Saudis are backed up by the United States. We sell them all their weapons. We get all their oil. Like, no. And Saddam Hussein and Saudi Arabia are not the same. Osama bin Laden is from Saudi Arabia. The USA supported him in Afghanistan. Like, these facts were right in front of our faces, but all these people just insisted. It was just this racist, simplistic view of the world. No, all Muslims are working together, and they all want to kill all Americans. They all are responsible for 9/11. And I couldn't deal with that. And so, I got to the point that I no longer believed the myths of U.S. society. I didn't believe the myths of U.S. society. I really didn't. I didn't think that capitalism was the greatest system. I didn't think that the American government was always right in every war. And that led me to look for something. And it led me to a very bad place because it seemed like all around me, I was in this very conservative town where everyone was, it was a very evangelical town, and it was so crazy because the town I grew up in, right, it was so wild. So at my school, right, it was a public school, but they were always doing religious stuff. They had a minister come in every Thanksgiving to give a sermon. That's not legal in the United States. They prayed at graduation. And I would have teachers that would just go off on religious rants in class about why you need Jesus, and why Islam was a terrorist religion and why you have to support Israel. And, I'd be sitting in class and we would just get, I think one day I remember I think I was a sophomore in high school. I walked into my Spanish class. It was my Spanish class, for goodness sakes. It was my Spanish class. So we sat down in the Spanish class, and my Spanish teacher said, "Oh, this is a man here in town who just beat cancer. And so because he beat cancer, he made a promise to God that he's going to preach the gospel to the class." And so my Spanish class that day was a sermon from some guy who had just overcome cancer. Well, I feel for that guy, right? It's great that he overcame cancer, and I'm a religious person myself. I respect his faith. But that was not appropriate. This is a public school, and I should have had Spanish class that day, not a sermon from this old man. I knew they were just constantly pushing evangelical neoconservative Christianity on us. But the craziest part of it all, and what drove me up the wall, is before they did this, every prayer in school, every speech about how we have to support our troops and all of that was preempted by, I know this is illegal, right? I know they probably will arrest me, right? And it's like, no one's going to arrest you. You guys are breaking all the rules about church and state. You're breaking all the rules about shoving politics in our face all the time. All the time you're breaking the rules. But somehow you're persecuted. And that drove me up the wall. These people think they're persecuted when they are just constantly, it was just like everywhere I went was just a neoconservative, right-wing Christian everything. And it was obnoxious. It was very, very obnoxious, right? And so, and I was so alienated from that, I was looking for something to believe in. And liberalism just led to this cynical place, this place of there is no hope. And I was really starting to get into that kind of place. Like, there is no hope. There's nothing to believe in. And then I started getting into communism. And I started reading and I started doing my own research, and it was really getting my hands, I started talking to a Maoist communist group. I mean, for a while I was like, well, maybe I'm a democratic socialist, but then, I got my hands on reading about the economics of the Soviet Union and how I'd been lied to, and how the Soviet Union had economic successes, about how China had economic successes. So I was talking to this Maoist group, but it was really when I got my hands on the writings of the old Communist Party, of the Communist Party USA in the 1930s, when I got my hands on Toward Soviet America by William Z. Foster. I read that book and I'm like, wow, I felt good. That was one of the most clear and to the point, it was like, wow, he explained the problem of capitalism. He explained socialism. He lays out a vision for what, the socialist United States, the USSA, will look like. I was like, this stuff makes sense to me. And then I got my hands on Anna Louise Strong. Anna Louise Strong. Oh my God, Anna Louise Strong. I mean, there's a dead person I wish I could meet. It's Anna Louise Strong. William Z. Foster and Anna Louise Strong. And I read Anna Louise Strong, I Change Worlds, the Stalin era. Beautiful stuff. And it's very hopeful. And it's very optimistic, and it's very spiritual. Anna Louise Strong, William C. Foster was a communist atheist. Anna Louise Strong probably was too, but her father was a minister. She grew up in a very religious tradition. She came to socialism through religion. And Anna Louise Strong, there's this very spiritual kind of Protestant undertone to her writing, right? She loved Stalin. She knew Stalin personally. She loved Mao. She knew Mao personally. But there's this drive in it, right? This drive to be right in one's soul, this drive to stand with the oppressed and do what is right, this drive to sacrifice, and it's like when you read Anna Louise Strong, it's really funny because it's like, I think about my family, right? I am descended, way back, if you go way back, like distantly descended from a guy named Charles G. Finney. Charles G. Finney. My mother's, family name is Finney. And Charles G. Finney was the founder of Oberlin College. I'm a Capricorn, was the founder of Oberlin College. And, he was considered also the founder of the Second Great Awakening. He was a pastor in New York City who was opposed to slavery. He thought that slavery was unchristian and a crime against the Christian teaching. So he would not give communion to anyone involved in the slave trade. And he was leading his flock in like lower Manhattan to go around protesting against slavery and handing out leaflets against slavery and calling on people involved in the slave trade to repent, right? They would have leaflets like repent, repent. And they would hand out leaflets, on Wall Street, which was originally, tied in with slavery, repent and all of this. And he was this abolitionist, this radical abolitionist here in New York City named Charles G. Finney. And eventually he took his congregation out to Ohio. And they, and he was considered this very, very famous. He has a Wikipedia page. You can read about him. I'm descended from that, right? And it's like Anna Louise Strong comes out of this revolutionary current in U.S. history that's like way back, right? The revolutionary current of the 1960s, no. The revolutionary current of the 1930s, no. This is like the revolutionary current of the 1800s. This is like the 1830s, the 1850s. This is like Ralph Waldo Emerson kind of stuff. This is like Henry David Thoreau kind of stuff. But there was this tradition in the United States of people who'd come to the United States because they were radicals. They wanted women to be able to vote, and they wanted, they wanted to abolish slavery, and they wanted to build some kind of, I'll write it down. They wanted to build some kind of, utopian society, right? And that there was this whole current of what you might call New England radicalism, of people that were deeply religious and quite conservative in their worldview, but it was rooted in trying to build some kind of egalitarian world. And there's a lot of like socialist communes in New England, right? Historically, right? And there's Robert Owen, the Scottish or Welsh socialist, who Karl Marx talks about and Frederick Engels talks about. He set up shop in Indiana, in New Harmony. And that there is, in American history, there is this very, very revolutionary New England Protestant current. And Anna Louise Strong comes out of that current. And that current is actually not that different than what I grew up with, especially with my mother's family. My mother's family, they were like that. If you go way back, they were religious and conservative, but they also were advocates of women's rights. They were, opposed to slavery, and they were rabble rousers. And it's like that kind of New England Protestantism. I think I found that in Anna Louise Strong's writings. Check out Anna Louise Strong. Really, really great. I have not heard of Gabriel Rockhill. I have not heard of him. But anyhow, so I got into that stuff, and that really gave me a purpose. And then reading the history of the Communist Party, and I got involved with I was with a Maoist group briefly. My first year of college, I was hanging out with a certain Maoist group that shall not be named. And I never really clicked with them because they weren't interested in class struggle. They weren't interested in economics. With them, it was all just, they were against police brutality. They did great work against police brutality, and they were against the wars, and that's good. But with them, it was kind of like, it was all about, there was a lot of really violent rhetoric, a lot of F-bombs. They dropped F-bombs in every speech. And, when we come to power, these MFers are going to, it was all very, very, they were, kind of LARPing the 1970s or 60s. And it was all kind of, this rhetoric about the U.S. government is oppressive. So when we come to power, it was, they were ultra left. So then, after a while, I ended up joining the Workers' World Party. And, I joined the Workers' World Party, and, I was in college for a while. After I was done with college, I eventually moved to New York. They moved me to New York, which was, thank goodness. It's the best thing that group ever did for me. Thank God they moved me to New York City. And I was in New York City. I ended up working with the International Action Center, and former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. I mean, I went over to his apartment many times. I got to know, on some level, not deeply, we weren't like intimate, but on a few occasions, I went over to his apartment and had, good conversations with former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. He was an anti-imperialist. He had been like Saddam Hussein's lawyer. He had been Milosevic's lawyer. He had, denounced the Vietnam War. And, and I was involved in the Occupy Wall Street protests. I was part of the Occupy Wall Street movement. And I started basically, my skills, as a speaker, as a writer, as an organizer, were not really appreciated. The group I was with, the Workers' World Party, was a dysfunctional, dying organization. I mean, that's really all there is to it. I mean, it was a couple people's ego trip, a couple boomers' ego trips, and they were old, and so therefore that was it, and it was just, I don't know. And I wanted to keep doing stuff, and they, and they got really into the woke stuff. As the woke stuff got going, they just full on embraced it. And I was saying, no, let's do communism, not wokeism. And they, no, they just loved the movement. And so we parted ways, but that's kind of my political development. I started, I was a journalist. I started doing a lot of my own work around 2013, 2014. I started writing a lot of my own articles and, and producing, news reports. I worked at the Middle Eastern TV network, Press TV. Now I work with RT. And, I've been very independent, but I realize that at the end of the day, all the speeches in the world and all the books in the world are not going to change things. You need an organization, but none of the organizations that currently exist in the United States are going to lead us closer to socialism. Unfortunately, the left in the United States is trapped, is trapped in the in the synthetic left. And I've done a lot of research on how the CIA created the synthetic left, and basically, that's what Red Tube Serves Imperialism is about largely, and other books. And here we are, right here we are, and I'm on here, and we're building the Center for Political Innovation, and we're on fire, and people are joining every day. And I mean, we have something new to offer: patriotic socialism, constructive, optimistic, anti-imperialism, right? We want to dismantle imperialism and build a new America for working families. We want the banks and the factories and the major industries to be controlled by the people. We're building this revolutionary think tank, right? And we're not advocating violence. We're advocating a peaceful democratic transition to socialism. We're explaining how economic policies, putting forward policy solutions to make the United States a better place, and opposing imperialism, and talking about why the USA ought to join the Belt and Road Initiative from China, and why the United States ought to get along with Russia and China, and not be backing up this global financial system that's trying to tear down independent countries. So that's me. That's where I came from, and I mean, some of the most rewarding work I did in Cleveland was around the issue of police brutality. I actually video recorded an instance of students. There were a group of African-American high school students who walked out of school to protest teacher layoffs, who got violently beaten up by the police. And I was there, and I video recorded the whole thing. And then Cleveland local news did like a hit piece and tried to say I'd organized the protest, which I hadn't. And then the mother of the young women who were beaten up spoke up, and they did a nice story about me in Cleveland Scene magazine called "The Communist Next Door." In 2015, I went and did, delivered medical aid to Yemen. We attempted to. Our ship was blocked by the Saudis, but I basically risked my life with a group of Iranian medical volunteers on a boat that went to Yemen to try and deliver medical aid. And that was a life-changing experience that really had an impact on me. And, I'm here. And now, I must say that the relationship that I have with the young people in the Center for Political Innovation, I'm an old man. I'm 34. I'm joking, but I'm not an old man. But I'm not a youth really anymore, right? I am a full-on adult, but the number of people that I meet that are 19, 20, 22, who are really ready to tear down capitalism, who can't stand the woke, fake, synthetic left, but want to see a new America for working families, want to fight for an optimistic future, are facing the same problem that I face: that pessimism, that hopelessness, that comes from having the ideology destroyed, but not replacing the ideology with anything. I meet so many young people that are ready to take up history's challenge, and become a 21st century socialist. And they like these broadcasts, and they like the writings that we do, and they want to help us build this organization. I mean, there's, David in San Angelo Solidarity built this beautiful organization in his community that does amazing work. And, there's people all over the country. We have, a California organizing committee. We got people in Boston. We got Students and Youth for a New America, and the groups in Washington, D.C. And I mean, we are really building something spectacular here. So that's where I'm at. And it gives me hope every day. And I love doing it. And I love being part of this movement, because we are doing something that nobody else is doing. We're doing something nobody else is doing. We are going back to what it's all about: the working class against the imperialists, fighting for a whole new country for working families. All right. China, World Economic Forum. And it's really great. It's really tremendous. So just wanted to show a couple clips, just a couple clips. So this clip, people forget that everything we have in this country, the weekend, minimum wages, unemployment insurance, all of this, Social Security, all of this was won through class struggle. Class struggle. The working class organizing and fighting back. And so I thought it might be important to just show you a little clip going over that history, because nobody knows this. A lot of people don't realize we had to fight tooth and nail against the bosses for everything we have.
The burst of construction and spending in the Soviet Union came during the Great Depression in the West. Many of the jobless liked what they heard about communism. It sounded like a worker's paradise.
I became a communist in short because of what I saw around me here in the United States of America. There was misery, there were children going to bed hungry, there was poverty, and there was no reason for it. We were the richest country in the world, and I saw communists out on the streets demonstrating and trying to do something about it. And that would sum up why I joined the Communist Party. Well, I believe what was going on in the Soviet Union was a noble experiment. You stop and think for a moment of what is the aim of socialism? It's to end all exploitation. It's to put an end to wars. It's to build a system of cooperation instead of confrontation. It's to do away with the extremely rich on one side and the extremely poor on the other side.
Understand, first of all, that most of us were political, at least myself, and our country was right in the midst of a big depression. We have soup lines all over the United States. Masses of people were out of work. Tremendous amount of discontent. Demonstrations almost in every major city. And we took part of that.
Millions joined unemployment councils, labor unions, the movement for Social Security, and student action groups. Thousands sought more fundamental change and were drawn to radical organizations. Many of those who would later fight in Spain joined groups like the Communist Party. They came to see the fight for better conditions in global terms.
You are now concerned with what happened in Timbuktu. If some poor working stiff was on strike in Timbuktu or Addis Ababa, and he's out there carrying a placard, and some cop came down and started busting his skull, you were concerned about that because that was your brother out in Addis Ababa or Timbuktu or Cape Town or Australia, any place else. They were your human beings, your class brothers.
You immediately found the whole new world opened up to you. You became aware of what was happening outside of Bensonhurst, outside of New York, west of the Hudson River.
Any demonstrations against war and fascism, I would be there. Hop the subway turnstile because I didn't have a nickel, and go down to 14th Street. And this is what I would do. And the beautiful thing about that, the feeling of camaraderie there, everyone had a oneness, a singleness of purpose, irrespective of their color or their sex. And this is a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, that's, people forget about, when the economy was in shambles during the 1930s. You saw a really big rise in membership in the Communist Party building unemployment councils and all of that. People forget about that. And, I liked that clip. And so I posted it on my YouTube channel like 10 years ago, but I was just looking for clips I could show on the channel. I thought I'd show that. Now, this is another clip, and this is from Jerry Rubin. Now, Jerry Rubin is a kind of a problematic 1960s intellectual, but he's on a talk show. Is CPI okay? All right. Writing it down. And I wrote the Saudi thing down too. But, he was on a talk show during the Vietnam War. He was on Phil Donahue's show, which Phil Donahue was quite young then. Phil Donahue's been around forever. I think he's still alive. He still does some TV stuff. But he was on Phil Donahue's show. And this woman called in and asked him, you like to protest the American government, but if you were in China or you were in the Soviet Union or Eastern Europe or Cuba, you would immediately go to jail. So Jerry Rubin, who at that point identified as like a Maoist communist or whatever, this is how he answered that woman. And I actually thought this is a really, really important answer. And I just wish more people could understand that. this.
The thing is, it's very easy for me to be an American and be on American land and soil and to advocate a revolution in Hungary or Russia. A lot of people go around this country, the patriots go around this country advocating to overthrow the Russian government, the Chinese government. Nothing happens to them. They're dressed in red, white, and blue. They're the American Legion. The test comes when you advocate change in your own country. And look what happens to us when we advocate change in our own country. We cross state lines to go to Chicago to protest the Democratic Convention. The pigs attacked us in the streets, wouldn't let us assemble in the parks, wouldn't let us march. This was in America in 1968, you see? And the organizers of those marches ended up in court, federal trial, 5 months, with Julius Adolf Hitler Hoffman as the judge. And we end up getting 25 years altogether, 5 years apiece. Our lawyer was sentenced to 5 years in jail. So the young people in this country who try to change the government find out they end up in jail. Timothy Leary is right now in jail in California for 20 years. John Sinclair, the Minister of Information of the White Panther Party, is in jail for 10 years for smoking dope. Bobby Seale, Eldridge Cleaver, Huey Newton, the BlackAnther Party has systematically attacked. Wait a minute.
You talk too much, dear.
That's okay. The Black Panther Party is being systematically attacked by the pigs on the federal and state level. So anyone who tries to protest in this country finds out that there's no First Amendment. It doesn't exist.
Yeah, and it's not really profound what he's saying there. Not really profound what he's saying. But basically, he's saying that advocating the overthrow of the Russian government or the Chinese government in America doesn't mean jack shit. It doesn't mean jack shit, you know? And I think what he's saying there is really relevant when you talk about these bread tubers, because you'll notice that they are right now, they are on fire, raising money for Ukraine. Oh, we're so mad about Russia. What have they done to challenge the American power structure? Other than telling people to vote for Biden, which is not in any way challenging the American power structure. The biggest challenge to the American power structure that we've recently seen, right, has been, well, you know, the demand, the only real demand, I guess, has been Medicare for all. There was a huge mobilization against big pharma, against the big corporations and the insurance cartels, Medicare, you know, Medicare for all march. And these people attacked it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And these people accused it of being fascist, and they accused it of being Nazi, right? And that's kind of what Jerry Rubin is getting at in that clip, that the real test of anybody is whether they'll stand against their own government, whether they'll stand up in their own country. And that's where you learn who's real and who's not. And that's also when you see the repression come down, like what was done to the Black Panthers, like what's been done to these anti-Vietnam War activists that he's describing. So that's really, really important. And one of the last things I wanted to tell you is that, and I got a couple clips to go with this, and then we'll open things up. I wanted to mention this because really one of the most pivotal moments when I came to realize that the American left, you know, was completely compromised and was completely screwed up, but that I was with another movement, was when I went to the World Festival of Youth and Students in 2013. In 2013, the World Festival of Youth and Students is this communist youth gathering that happens every 4 years. It's not officially communist. It's like in favor of democracy, against imperialism, against fascism. And it happens every 4 years. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, they didn't do it for a while. And then Cuba revived it. And like all the communist parties of like the whole world, you know, send their young people to go to these conferences. And I got to go to one. I've been to two of them now. I went to the one in Sochi, Russia in 2017, and I went to the one in 2013. And, you know, those are my people. I mean, I went to those conferences. Those are real communists. They wear suits and ties. You know, they represent millions of people in parliaments and huge trade unions. I always tell people in the United States, if you're a communist, you have two choices. On the one hand, you have the one option, which is to be a reformist and just vote for the Democrats. And communism is just kind of this intellectual thing you do on your own. But at the end of the day, you're just a Democrat. Or you have the other option, which is you can be a nut job and sell newspapers about Trotsky and burn the American flag and just kind of be out of touch. But these communists that I met in Ecuador and in Russia, in Sochi, at the World Festival in Russia, the communists at the World Festival of Youth and Students, these are real communists. Like they're not crazy ultra-leftist nuts. They represent a big portion of their population. In a lot of these countries, they are the government. But at the same time, they also have not abandoned their ideals. They really believe in communism. They really believe in communism. They can explain to you in great detail how they want to move their country towards socialism and how their mass organizations are functioning. And that's what I saw. And I realized that the communists of Africa, the communists of South America, the communists of Asia are very different than the communists of the United States. The communists of the United States, with their ripped jeans and all that, but the suit socialists, I mean, these people are for real. And, and when I went to the Quito, Ecuador, Communist Youth Festival, it was a life-changing experience to actually talk to these people and hear them say, what's wrong with you American communists? Why are you so weird? Why are you out of touch? Why haven't you tried to, talk about George Washington and Abraham Lincoln? And they just talk common sense. They said, have you looked at Bolivarianism? Have you ever considered something like Bolivarianism for the United States? I mean, they understood that that there was something wrong with the American left, and that communism as a movement and what the American synthetic left does is completely different. And thank you very much. I do appreciate that. And that was a really big moment for me. So I actually have 3 videos here. They're very quick videos just to give you a taste of what the World Festival of Youth and Students is like. So, like, the first morning I was there, this is Quito, Ecuador. At the time, Rafael Correa was a socialist, an anti-imperialist, a friend of Julian Assange, and Rafael Correa was president. And one of the things that Rafael Correa did is he actually gave like karate, like it wasn't karate, but like martial arts training to all the young people. So we went to the park, Bicentennial Park, this huge park that used to be an airport where they had the festival. So we walk in and there's all these young people inspired by their socialist president at this Communist Youth Festival doing karate or doing martial arts moves. And so I took some video of it. Forgive me, it's not the highest quality video, but this is the young people at the World Festival of Youth and Students, Ecuadorian youth, doing martial arts.
About what is happening here?
Yeah, this is in the sport. The name is Sohukai. It's a martial art typical from Ecuador. They have the move, the particular from the Ecuador Andinal dance and the folklore typical from Ecuador. You can practice in the Sohukai self-defense against the weapon like the knife and other weapon. So like I don't know, like the Krav Maga and food, like the Jiu-Jitsu. You have the hits with I can say it in English. The food.
Your shirt says Ministro del.
Minister of the Sport is a partner from the Sohukai in Ecuador in the tournament, in the other activities. But Sohukai do many activities around the country in the year. The activity, I don't know what is the other question that you have, sir.
President Correa is supportive of these kind of programs?
Yes, President Correa is a big support for this activity. We can do this activity like sport, Ecuadorian, just for the help of the President of Ecuador.
Wow, that's great.
Yes, but the first person in Ecuador, he have everything to support this activity. Is a very good for the son of the president practice this activity.
Wow, that's great. It's part of the process, the Bolivarian process, or
yes, it's part of this process, but in this moment, the son of president not practice this activity because he have the other activities important than the school. I don't know.
Wow, it's great.
Yeah, that was, yeah. I went to this festival and I'm in the morning and there are all these like Ecuadorian young people from working class neighborhoods like doing karate, doing martial arts together. It was really, really cool. But then this is the moment when, so these next two videos, the last two videos I'm going to show you, it was kind of emotional as all the different countries were arriving in the park. Because in the United States, like my group, we sent 5 people. I think the Communist Party USA sent 5 people. The Socialist Workers Party, which is totally anti-communist, which I don't know why they were there, but I think they were just there to like stalk the Cubans or something. They sent like 15 people. It was a really small delegation for the United States, but in a lot of countries, obviously Cuba, Vietnam, China, these are, the communists are the ruling party, and they sent hundreds of people. So, it was kind of an emotional moment where there'd be like one delegation from one country would come in, there'd be another delegation from another country. This is the moment when the Cubans entered the festival. Yeah, just a quick clip. That was the Cubans marching into the World Festival of Youth and Students. And I also learned there's a lot of countries, where the Communist Party is in power, but you don't really know about it. Like, like Angola, for example. No one talks about communism in Angola, but it's actually the MPLA, which is the Marxist-Leninist party that took power after the Portuguese withdrew, that had been waging guerrilla warfare against the Portuguese colonialists. They took power in Angola, and there was a lot of communists from Angola who were there, from the MPLA youth. There were a lot of communists, from Zimbabwe, a whole delegation from ZANU-PF, right? Zimbabwe is led by a Marxist-Leninist party, So one of the countries that again, we don't think about having communists, right? In power is Namibia, right? You never think of the communist country of Namibia, but it's SWAPO, I believe, the Southwest African People's Organization, which, now is dominated by a lot of more kind of social democratic and reformist thinking. But it started out as a communist party, and it's friendly to China. And they sent a huge delegation of people to this festival. And this is the delegation from Namibia. And I don't know what the song they were singing, but I assume it was some kind of revolutionary song from Namibia. So there you go. That was just some stuff I wanted to share with you all. So I just thought that was fun. I just thought we'd have a clip show here tonight. That's kind of what we did here. So thanks, everybody. So now I think we are going to do that thing where we open it up. We're going to open it up. So I am going to pull up the StreamYard link, and we'll take 3, 4, 5 max people, I guess. We'll take 5 people max. First come, first serve. I'm going to drop the link here. Like I said, if your face isn't showing, I'm not going to show you. You have to show your face. I have to be able to hear your audio or whatever. And if anyone does any funny business, you're out of there. All right. So I'm dropping the StreamYard link now. So if you want to come on and make a few comments before we start answering super chat questions for the second half. I thank everyone who sent a super chat, by the way. Much appreciated. Much appreciated. You got the StreamYard link now, folks. So let's proceed. Let's proceed, right? I can remove all these clips I played. That'll make space in the studio. So yeah, if you want to come on in, yeah, see, there's somebody I'm not going to let in because he has shooter in his name and he puts creepy stuff in the chat. So not going to let that guy in, but oh, Wow. Well, it's my lucky night because we've got my friend Ramiro. Hey, Ramiro. Hey, what's happening? How you
How's it
doing?
going, Caleb? Great stream, man. How's it
Yeah,
going?
isn't it going great? What's new?
It's going well. Seeing your clips from Ecuador really brought me a lot of memories because me and Ophelia lived there when we were working out there, 2017. And I have to say, everything you're saying is exactly right. The people loved Korea. The people loved the citizens' revolution. Everywhere we went, you would see programs for youth. And actually, one of the interesting programs that they had in Ecuador was that there was a gang in the US called the Latin Kings that they also had in Ecuador. And the Ecuadorian government actually hired them to do a lot of social work. So I think
Really?
Rafael Correa is one of the presidents who's very underrated in the left. But yeah, those clips are beautiful. And that spirit of internationalism is something that I am very inspired by.
That's great. Yeah, no, everyone should check out Ramiro's channel, right? It's really great. I've been on there many times. Unmasking Imperialism is the name of the channel. You do great content. You have great guests. You always have a lot of like clips. It's a very high tech, like well put together channel. Great introductions, and I think you had Grover Fur on your channel recently to
Yeah.
talk about Ukrainian history. That was a great stream, and he just talked about how just there's so much malarkey in Ukrainian history. That was a great video. Go check out his interview with Grover Fur he did recently. That was pretty cool. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it was awesome talking to him. He's a wealth of knowledge, and he's somebody who I respect because just like you and just like everybody else, I respect people who don't follow the trends. Right now, it's not trendy to defend Russia against imperialism. Right now, it's not trendy to point out the roots of Ukrainian fascism. And when you do, you get a lot of heat. And I have respect for the people who hold their ground, maintain a principled anti-imperialist line as you have and Grover Fur has and many others. And so it's always cool to learn from different revolutionary scholars and activists and people who aren't afraid to speak their mind. And it was really an honor speaking to him. That was really cool. And
Yeah,
congrats
well,
on the interview, by the way, too.
his work is relentless. I mean, he has worked really, really hard, to just kind of stand against what he calls the anti-Stalin paradigm and honestly look into Soviet history. And is these allegations true? Are they not true? And I mean, he's shown that Trotsky did lie about being in communication with Zinoviev and Bukharin, that there were mail receipts, and that's a pretty big revelation. That Trotsky always claimed he was never in touch with any of these people at the Moscow trials who were convicted of collaborating with him. No, he had nothing to do with them. Well, the fact that he covered that up, that he was in communication with them, I mean, that's something, right? Now, that doesn't prove that Trotsky was doing absolutely everything, that went on at the Moscow trials, but that shows that's a pretty big lie, right? I mean, that's a pretty big omission.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, you're out in Los Angeles, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And well, tell me, what is the political atmosphere out like there these days? I mean, obviously there's this big swell of Ukraine stuff, but what else is on people's minds?
Well, right now, the Ukraine stuff is insane. Everywhere you go, it's interesting because on the west side of LA, for people who aren't familiar with LA, the west side of LA is the more bourgeois part of LA, and it tends to be more liberal, hipster. And in those areas, everywhere you go, there is the Ukraine flag. There are a lot of in West Hollywood, interestingly enough, which is also a LGBTQ community, they'll have the LGBTQ flag and the Ukraine flag. So they kind of try to do that branding. And then on the east side and in the south side, which is more of the working class parts of LA, people aren't really falling for it. People aren't really talking about what's going on. They hear about it. I think based on my conversations, like I work in construction here in LA, and I work with a lot of working class dudes, from South Central or from East LA, and when I hear their conversations about Russia, Ukraine, even though most of them are right wing, it's interesting. And it touches on something you mentioned in a stream a few days ago, which I think was right, that a lot of people's conception of who the right wing is in 2022 is very outdated. There are a lot of Black and Latino conservatives, unfortunately, within our communities. And even hearing from them about Russia, Ukraine, like even they're not buying the nonsense. They're like they're trying to get us into war. They're trying to push for aggression against Russia. They obviously, it's not that they're approaching it from an anti-imperialist perspective, but they're like, we don't want our gas prices to go up. We don't want any more wars. And it just goes to show you that communists, like you say in your streams and all the time, like communists have to get away from trying to organize these liberal latte leftists, so in parentheses, in the West Side and in bourgeois areas, and start working with people who may have different views in working class areas, because a lot of times we'll agree on more things than we might think, you know. And I think this Russia-Ukraine thing has really been eye-opening for me, here locally, but also internationally. I feel that one analogy that I told somebody is that this was like this was a pop quiz, and a lot of the left failed. You know, a lot of us failed. A few of us passed. A few of us passed, but most of us failed. And it's really sad, and we have to brush up, because these tactics of imperialism are getting better by the day. They're getting more advanced, and I think what this has shown us, revealed to us, is that if we want to build an anti-imperialist front in the United States, we have to not rely on the NGO liberal kind of circles, and start working with average people who may not have the most politically correct views, but they don't want wars, they don't want empire, they don't want more gas price hikes. So it's been really eye-opening, I'll say that.
Well, very good. Well, thank you very much. And people check out Unmasking Imperialism. Great work by Ramiro. Ramiro does great work. He's well known in anti-imperialist circles in the United States. Thank you so much, Ramiro. It's really great to have you
Hope
on.
to see you soon, man.
Yeah.
Come out to
Nothing
LA
made me
soon.
happier than seeing that you were the first person to hop on in. So, all right.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. All right. Next, we got Ben. Oh, I'm sorry. We got Ben. Hey, Ben.
Hi, Caleb. How are you? I knew that you were a Ohio socialist, so out of solidarity with a fellow Ohio socialist, I wanted to tune in.
Oh, okay. What part of Ohio are you from?
I'm from Cincinnati.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
not really Cincinnati. I'm from around there.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
you're
I
from
know.
Cleveland, right?
No, I mean, I lived in Cleveland for a few years. I'm originally from a little tiny town that's about 2.5 hours south of Cleveland called Orrville, Ohio. But I
Okay.
lived in Cleveland. I went to college near Cleveland, and I was an activist in Cleveland for a number of years. But yeah, how'd you get into socialism, Ben?
My parents are pretty left leaning, but kind of similar to you. Mostly it was in college. I noticed I was never really able to get into, and I think this was for the best. I was never really able to get into the online left. It was all kind of IRL. But then after finishing college, I started looking at the online left, and it was pretty unwelcome, unpleasant place. So I have to commend you for, because I can tell just from watching some of the stuff that you've done. I've kind of looked into your stuff for probably a year or two now.
Oh, wow.
Looking at the stuff that you've done, I can tell that you're the kind of guy that's actually been out there, seen the same things I have, experienced the same things, the highs and the lows, which with a lot of these people on the online left, I don't see that.
Yeah. There's a lot of chronically online stuff, and IRL is always, superior to online. Unfortunately, though, I do maintain out of the movement to the masses. I mean, we need to get to average people.
Yeah.
And a lot of the IRL is just kind of embedding yourself in this kind of activist
Sure.
space.
No, I mean, I experienced many of the same struggles as you did from what you've talked about.
Now, tell me, near you in Cincinnati, there's a place called Yellow Springs, Ohio. You
Yes,
ever been
I
there?
visited several times.
Yeah, the college that used to be there is shut down, right? The college no longer exists, right?
I think for a year they were shut down or something, but you're talking about Antioch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for a year or so they were shut down, but I think they've brought it back for some. I don't know if it's truly like a licensed university anymore. Maybe they just do some community college stuff there. But Yellow Springs is a weird place. Have you been there often?
Oh yeah, I have. I
Yeah.
have been there. Yeah. What I think is interesting is I know that in the 1960s, that was a really big leftist hub. A lot of the Maoist groups were headquartered, they had offices and bookstores and stuff in Yellow Springs, and and that it was, and you wouldn't know that if you go there now. It's just kind of this, there's like a lot of vegetarian restaurants.
Yeah,
and stuff. I think in one of Abby Hoffman's books, he has a chapter about going to Antioch and going to Yellow Springs.
Yeah.
And like how he like showed one of his movies in Yellow Springs, and like the conservative farmers in the area came, but also like the hippie young people came, and I don't know, it was, but it's interesting. I've been to Yellow Springs and Yellow Springs, Ohio, and then Dayton, right, is near
Yeah.
Cincinnati, and that's where there's a big U.S. Air Force base, right?
Yeah, right, Pat. I live basically halfway between Dayton and Cincinnati.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good. Yeah, that's Southern Ohio. It's down there by Kentucky, right?
Yep. Most of my family's from Eastern Kentucky on my dad's side. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I had one other thing that
Sure,
I
sure. Go ahead.
wanted to tell you though. I really commend you for talking a lot about left-wing history, and I commend you for looking at your past, your childhood as, kind of having these patriotic feelings for America and talking about how that led you towards socialism, how that led you to anti-imperialism. I sympathize a lot with that. I feel like there are many people like that, myself included, and it's good to have a voice like that on the internet.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, we all know that the reason we say that is because we're actually Nazis, right? It's National Socialism repackaged, and that when we say that we love America, what we mean is we love slavery, we love colonialism, and
all the awful things. Yeah,
all the awful things, right? And that we're just not as revolutionary as anyone who can tweet "F America," right?
Yeah.
And that makes them 10 times as revolutionary as we
So
are.
it's a strong sentiment that I'm sure the colonized press all over the world, really, really admire when somebody says "F America" on Twitter. Yeah.
Well, and the funny thing is, I've been there, right? I mean, it's like, I was in this Maoist group for a while, and I was in the Workers' World Party, and we had attitudes like that, but did we really get any place? I mean, did it really do anything? I mean, it just kind of leads you to you being isolated,
Yeah, I mean, for instance, in my own experience, a lot of organizing on the campus ends up being a lot of people who, no matter what their family background is, their perception of left-wing politics is totally centered on their perception of politics in general is just totally centered on the United States. And you were talking about, going to this Democratic Youth Forum, and you got to see all these people from so many different countries and what socialism meant to them. And no matter, again, where somebody's family background is from, they become so entrenched in the American way of doing things that they become very weird. They become very difficult for any normal person who's outside the movement to talk to. I was, fortunate and blessed enough. My mother's an immigrant. I have family in foreign countries. I get to go to these countries, visit them. And even though, my family overseas isn't communist or anything, but you get to see communist parties in these countries. You get to see the different attitude that people have towards politics, the difference of what it means to them. It's less about virtue signaling and more about organizing rationally around what you perceive to be your interests. And many times people misperceive their interests, but still at the end of the day, it's something that's you can at least argue with somebody who misunderstands his own interests rather than somebody who's saying, well, I'll vote for this because I want to signal I'm a good person or whatever.
Right. Well, when it's really funny because when I was in Cleveland, I remember one of the neatest things we did is the new Black Panther Party, which is not the original Black Panther Party, which is much more like Islamic and Black nationalist in its orientation. They had an event at Cleveland State University. And because my activist group I was involved with, because we were working around a certain like political prisoner campaign or whatever, they let us come. But it was very controversial. Like there had been letters to the newspaper saying that the new Black Panther Party was anti-Semitic. They didn't want to have the event come. So the professor who'd arranged for the new Black Panther Party to come to speak in Cleveland to have their event, he got up and he gave this speech about why he would always open it up to the new Black Panthers. And he talked about how when he was living in Harlem when he was a kid, he was a young African-American child in Harlem in the 70s. And the garbage would never get picked up in their neighborhood. The garbage, just because it was a Black neighborhood, it was low-income folks, the garbage never got picked up, right? So the Black Panthers went into his neighborhood and they started collecting the garbage themselves. And then they put it in the middle of a street in front of like the courthouse and lit it on fire, right? And then from then on, the garbage was always picked up on time, right? So I heard that story and I thought that was kind of a neat story, right? And that's like a story of like real community activism. And then when I went to Venezuela, I heard the exact same story from Venezuelan communists. And they were explaining what the 90s was like and how in the 90s, they in the 70s they had been like fighting in guerrilla warfare in the countryside because Venezuela was like a military dictatorship and you couldn't organize. But then when they, after the dictatorship kind of, was absolved in the 80s, when it was safe to organize in the cities, they did start engaging in these kind of community struggles. And they started talking about, and then the garbage wouldn't be collected because the IMF was having us lay off city workers. So we started collecting the garbage, and then we dumped it on the major highways and lit it on fire, and then they would have to collect it. And I thought, wow, like that's what real communists do. It's that kind of work, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's, and like that's why this professor, I mean, he wasn't a communist, but that's why when the Black Panthers had approached him, the new Black Panther Party, and said, can we have you come? And all this pressure had been put on him. Oh, how dare you bring this anti-Semitic, homophobic group or whatever. He said, no, I'm going to do that because he loved the Black Panthers because of what they stood for and what they represented in his community. And I thought that was just a neat story, and it translates, you know what I mean? And that's the kind of struggles. That's what communists are known for around the world, right? It's not aesthetic. It's not a hipster phase. It's real work, you know?
And don't you think the way that it translates cross-culturally is such a good example of how a material analysis works? These are people in different places all over the world who have a problem. Their municipal government's abandoning them, and there's muck, garbage, trash all over their neighborhood. And these people independently, there's a certain number of tools that we have with the limited resources that we have as communists, and people are inventive, they're smart, and they come to the same conclusions all around the world, and we can do so much more when we work together.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for coming on, Ben. Best wishes to you out there in Cincinnati. Good luck. Thanks. All right, we got Red Chilean. How you doing, Red Chilean? Are you actually in Chile?
I live in Chile. I lived in the United States in Santa Barbara. I'm very sad when I heard that you were down there. I wish I could have been around. I was gone for 2 years since.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, great. What's the latest in Chile? I know there's a lot of anti-austerity struggles that are happening, and what's new?
Well, I mean, I'll just go out and say this so people know where I'm coming from, because here in Chile we have the communists are in government, right? And that's led to a lot of controversy within the left, because there's a lot of people such as myself that feel that the Communist Party has been down an incorrect path for a long time. Mm-hmm. And today was a particular holiday where during the dictatorship, in the first years of the dictatorship, 2 brothers were gunned down in the street just in cold blood.
Really?
Yeah, and ever since it's been it's not an official holiday, but it's remembered by the entire of the radical left as a day of mourning and as a day of protest. And today, it's the first time that we have the communists officially in government. They've been in coalitions, but these guys there's 2 parties leading the government right now: the Broad Front and the Communist Party. And the protest came out, and it was repressed. So that's been a source of a lot of controversy, a lot of debate. I think people who know me know where I stand on that. I don't necessarily want to come into your show, and I don't know where you stand. I don't want to just bash the current government. I don't feel it's my place to do so here.
Okay, sure. But I mean, that's interesting. I mean, and that the communists have been propelled to power through popular struggles. It sounds like. I mean, there is an anti-austerity movement that's very strong. I mean, I've seen the videos of the protests on RT and such. I mean, they don't get any coverage over here in U.S. media.
Yeah, it was an interesting time, those protests. It was interesting. It was in a time in Latin America where I felt it was similar to the Arab Spring here. Where if you actually look at it, the most impactful protest was the one in Bolivia that actually overthrew a left-wing government. Which is quite unfortunate. Thank God that the Mass Party managed to fight against that. But over here, the actual efforts to write the new constitution, which was the big victory that came out of there, today they're looking rather disappointing. The new constitution that's coming out, it seems that it was very difficult for it to ever be worse than the old constitution. It was written by a dictatorship. But the new constitution is really struggling to get past the fundamental issues such as water ownership in this country, the ownership of the roads. In America, you don't have a lot of toll booths because most of the roads are national. If I understand it correctly, here that's not the case. In order to, my family has a farm. Part of my family lives in this farm over in Quillón. I live in Concepcion. And to go back in there, it's on top of the gas, you have to pay $10 on toll fares. It's 2 tolls, right? And it's that adds up.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Well, best wishes on the current struggles going on in Chile.
Wait, Caleb. So,
Yes.
I feel like you want to transition, but I wanted to ask you. You were interviewed. Not a lot of your followers know this, but you were interviewed by an academic grouping that I'm quite fond of. It's called the how do you translate Círculo de Estudios Patrióticos? The Circle of Patriotic Studies of Indo-American Patriotic Studies with Carlos Salazar. I like them a lot.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I did an interview with them. Aren't they kind of like they're related to some Enver Hoxha Communist Party or something?
They're related to my party. We don't like to be attributed directly to Enver Hoxha because of. I feel like you'd agree with a lot of this. We think that he had some good points criticizing Eurocommunism, but then as far as the geopolitical position with China, with the Soviet Union, he was quite ultra left. So if you look at our Wikipedia page, it does say Hoxha as we try to edit it out as much as possible, but it seems that someone's very keen on penning us as such.
Are you similar to that party in Turkey? Because in Turkey there's a party called the Patriotic Party or something like that. And
yes.
Yeah. Is this a similar?
I'm familiar. I'm not too familiar with that party, but just on the image alone, we have what we call a popular organization, which we have the party, which is where the very dedicated, the nerds, if you will, the guys that read the books. That's where we organize. But then we actually need to get out to, as you say, from the movement to the masses, right? So we set up what's called popular organizations, and our biggest one is a legal party called Patriotic Union. And just on the surface of it, I don't know the Turkish party all that well, but it seems to me that they have a similar orientation.
Very good. Very good. Well, thank you for coming on. And I mean, I
really
enjoyed that interview, and people should check out that group, right? The Patriotic.
They're very good.
Yeah.
The Patriotic Study. It's hard to translate. The Circle of Patriotic Study of Patriotic and Indo-American Studies. They try to fuse the national identity with the indigenous identity, which is it's quite. It makes a lot of sense here because, as we say here, we're all mestizos, right? We are it gets a little weird when you translate into English, but the genetic makeup is a mix of the European and the indigenous people here. That's not something you saw as much in the North.
Interesting. Okay, well, thanks for coming on. All good. I think we're going to end the section where we do the people coming in. There's not going to be any more folks coming in. That's okay. That's fine. I'm glad that I know how to work this and we don't have problems, because there were definitely people trying to cause problems. So I don't know how often we're going to do this call-in thing. It may be, look, this channel's growing, and the bigger you get, the bigger the audience is, and people are awesome. And everyone we just had talk there, Ben, Red Chilean, Ramiro, they were awesome, but there were some people trying to get in doing funny stuff, and we may or may not do this very much. I mean, I like opening up the stream, but you got to be careful with it, but that's okay. Let's do the roll call, and then I'll start answering super chats for the rest of the night, and that's how we'll do it. All right, let's do the roll call. Who's with us? Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Very, very good. JT24 is in Mississippi. Who else? We got Wabacone Hugo. Very, very good. There we go. Chaya from Montreal. St. David's, Bermuda. Germany, Oldenburg. Hugo from the Netherlands. Clydebank, James Graham. Patrick from Southwest Florida. Adam from Vegas, baby. Alan in Chicago. Louisville, Kentucky. We got Zach in Seattle. We got Balthazar in Oakland. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Bill Meyer and Hamtramck, the only Muslim majority. Wow. Michael from Ithaca, New York. Shout out to you. Don D in NYC. We got Enoch from Australia. Rachel from Brooklyn. I'm in Brooklyn also. I'll try not to speak too loud. Maybe you'll hear me through the walls. I'm just kidding. All right. Montreal, Quebec. Dallas, Texas. Carolyn and Staten Island. Northern Lower Michigan. North Olmsted, Ohio. Syracuse, New York. Midwest. Ben in Grand Junction, Raphael in Brazil, Mike in North Carolina, Detroit, Michigan, Maine, Manitoba, Grumpy Towers, Joanne of the Netherlands, Mike in North Carolina, Ola in Florida, Peter from Caleb's apartment. I have a feeling you're not here, Peter, but there you go. Tim in Chesterfield, UK, Red in Groton, Connecticut, Jose Gonzalez from Caracas, Venezuela, Elias from Finland, David from Australia, Red in Groton, Connecticut, Gius in Greece, Jose from Newburgh, New York, Marissa. We have Marissa from Washington State, Jose. Oh, I already did that one. Rex from Las Vegas, Pomona, California, Neil Fraser in Hong Kong. Good stuff, folks. Good stuff. Jorge from Puerto Rico, Kieran from San Diego, Christian in Oakland, who officially just joined CPI. Wow, that's really great. Congratulations. Anyone can join CPI. You just sign up, cpiusa.org. Kelly from Maine, Naples, Florida, Austin, Texas, Aaron Chamberlain, William Kane from Gateshead, England. Very, very good. Very, very good. Nate Pano from Facebook Jail. Hey, it's Mark from California. Keep up the good work, buddy. Absolutely will do that. Absolutely will do that. Syracuse, New York. Zane from Long Beach. Very good. Lightning Trail. All righty. All right. I think we got Syracuse, New York. Very good. All right. So now I got John Whitty in Houston. We got Phil Sang in Florida, Southwest Michigan, Steve Richter. Temple City, California. All right. I think next we are going to start answering super chat questions. So if you have a super chat, I will answer it. If you don't have one, I won't, but I will answer your super chat questions. And as always, folks, I hate to have to say this because this will make them jump up and down with joy. But if there's people that are acting like fools in the chat, we've got mods who can deal with them. Just ignore them and don't pay them any mind. Look, we've been through it all. A lot of crazy things have happened in the chat, and we have survived. So just if people start acting like fools, the mods will take care of them, and just ignore them. All right. First super chat question. Is MK Ultra, Scientology, and mind control cults. Well, those are three different things. Project MK Ultra was a program started by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, and it served the purpose of trying to figure out mind control. Basically, what happened was during the Korean War, there were a lot of communists. During the Korean War, there were a lot of U.S. soldiers who were taken prisoner. And in the POW camps, I believe it was like 3,000 of them. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Gala. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think I met you in Texas, so shout out to you. During the Korean War, there were a lot of American GIs who were taken prisoner as prisoners of war, and they were held in China, and they were in the camps. They were given political education, and a number of them signed confessions to war crimes, and a number of them actually became communists. Our hippies' creation of the CIA. All right, a lot of them became communists. A lot of them, moved out of jail and lived in China, and some of them moved back to the United States after a couple years, and it was kind of a big deal, right? That you had a number of U.S. GIs who became communists, and the word in Chinese, that for what they would do is they called it thought reform, right? Meaning that they would try to get you to, abandon your anti-communist and pro-imperialist thoughts and adopt revolutionary thoughts. But the literal translation of the word is brainwash. And so after the Korean War, there became an obsession in American media with the concept of brainwashing, because how could these good American wholesome GIs from Kansas and Iowa and Pennsylvania, how could these good all-American boys who were in Korea, how could they become communists? Now, it couldn't be that the communists had a good argument on their side. God forbid, that couldn't be possible. Couldn't be that maybe they did commit war crimes in the Korean War, which there were actually a huge amount of war crimes. U.S. troops did horrendous things during the Korean War, burning people alive, pouring gasoline into basements, etc. All right, okay. Great. Writing it down. And, there were, firebombing. The USA bombed every building above 1 story tall in the northern half of the Korean Peninsula. It was really horrendous. So because the U.S. government assumed that there couldn't actually be any reason these guys would be converted, they were convinced that Mao and the Chinese communists had some magical voodoo, right? They had some they had somehow brainwashed and done magic and brainwashed these GIs to become communists. That's where the term brainwash comes from. MK Ultra, and you can read, there's a whole book on MK Ultra called The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, and it's written by John D. Marks. It's a very well-researched book. It, gets into the details of what the Church Committee revealed during the 1970s. And it goes into the CIA was trying to figure out how they could change people's minds. And that led them to start experimenting with LSD, the hallucinogenic drug. and that led them to do weird things like Operation Midnight Climax, where they were getting, hooking people on LSD and stuff like that. And, it was just no, they weren't hooking people, but they were dosing it to people without their knowledge, without their consent. They were going around and they went to brothels and like chained people to the beds and gave them LSD. And it was they did quite a bit of underhanded, shady, immoral stuff. And there's another book by Stephen Kinzer on this. It's called the Poisoner in Chief, and it describes these kinds of activities. And basically, the CIA determined you can't really brainwash people, right? You can't really do it. If the person wants to be convinced and you can convince them to trust you, maybe you can. But for the most part, the idea that you can like hypnotize someone into changing their political ideology, wrong. Doesn't work that way. And that's Project MK Ultra, and part of it was disseminating drugs all across the United States. And one of the main places they did their LSD experiments was on college campuses, and drugs were widely distributed throughout the United States. It already exists. CPI Midwest already exists. Get in touch with the Chicago people. Get in touch with people throughout the Midwest. There's plenty of people in the Midwest. But that's Project MK Ultra. So that's what Project MK Ultra is. It was a CIA program that involved experimenting with mind control and brainwashing, and distributing hallucinogens. And there's a lot that's been exposed about it. It was a pretty horrendous program. And they did all kinds of stuff. So there's that. Now the next question is a three-part question. Scientology. What is Scientology? Well, Scientology was started by L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron Hubbard was a science fiction writer, who was, he was in World War II, and he was like a naval intelligence officer, I believe. He was from a very wealthy background, from a very wealthy family. He wrote science fiction stories. He was a full-time sci-fi writer, and he was very interested in different things. He was apparently very interested in psychoanalysis and Freudianism. At one point, he was friends with William Alanson Wright. He probably had some contact with Wilhelm Reich. And he was also doing like studies and working with GIs who had PTSD from the Second World War. And basically, he developed his own theory of mental health that he called Dianetics. Because he was a well-known science fiction writer, this book he wrote called Dianetics was widely circulated. And a lot of mental health professionals looked at it and they said, this is bull honky. This is baloney. This is just not true, right? It doesn't work, right? And eventually he got sued for medical fraud, and Dianetics was shut down. And so then he reinvented it as the Church of Scientology. And it is basically this kind of hypnosis therapy. You go and you relive painful memories, and they try to, you relive painful memories and are kind of hypnotized in the process. And it kind of gives you a feeling of relief. You pay them money to do it. And then as you do it, they have esoteric beliefs that you gradually learn bit by bit by bit. Oh, Midwest Conference. Well, we're waiting for information on that. Hopefully Chicago soon, but until we get some information together, that's not clear. So, we're aiming for May to have a conference in Chicago, but we don't know yet. But anyway, so that's what Scientology is. It's this weird hypnosis therapy that kind of turned into a religion. And people see it as a very predatory practice. I don't know. They have a lot of influence. They used to have a lot of influence in Hollywood, I guess. They've been kind of driven out of Hollywood recently. I think Leah Remini and some others have kind of beat the drum against them. But in the 80s and 90s, they really had a lot of power in Hollywood. Like they could get a movie canceled. If they didn't like a movie, they could get it scrapped. Like that's how powerful they were. A lot of Hollywood people, John Travolta, and who else? Tom Cruise, and a lot of Hollywood stars would join it, and they kind of got into the practice of recruiting Hollywood stars and recruiting people who went to Hollywood who wanted to be in movies, right? They kind of got the reputation of this is a group you can join and they'll help your career. Why did anti-imperialism never take off in Mexico? They'll advance your career. And I mean they exist, and it's a very powerful and very wealthy institution. But you know, Native American communist movements. All right. It was a very powerful. They're just an entity, right? They're one of these illiberal institutions. Now, I believe the Nation of Islam, which is a black nationalist group, I have a lot of respect for. They're involved with the Church of Scientology. They have a relationship with them, and I mean, cult is generally the word used to describe them, but they're an illiberal religious therapy group, basically. And the mental health profession does not recognize what they're doing as helpful to people. Largely what they're doing, if you have trauma or PTSD, they're re-traumatizing you, right? They're re-traumatizing you, basically. I don't know what to say about it. I mean, it's a group. They exist. They used to have a lot more power than they do. In more recent years, and they've kind of moved in a more illiberal direction, and that's a whole nother conversation. I think they were pretty solidly for Trump in the last election. Trump had some kind of unspoken relationship with them. There's a Fox News anchor who got fired or left Fox News, Greta Van Susteren, and Trump arranged for her to be on Voice of America. And that was very much, she's a very outspoken Scientologist. So yeah, there you go. That's what that is. What are mind control cults? I wouldn't use that word. That's kind of the mythology of Steve Hassan, but there are varying degrees of illiberalism in institutions. There's varying degrees of authoritarianism and fanaticism. And it's important for any organization to try and remain in touch with reality. I think a lot of communist groups in the United States are culty. And they become culty because they kind of get disconnected from reality. They kind of get to be their own little, and that's what out of the movement to the masses is largely about. The more that you become divorced from the masses, the more that it starts to become your own little world where you're just kind of listening to other people and talking at yourself. You start to be kind of closed out from what other people think. You start to lose your ability to effectively communicate to the outside world, and you become this strange, isolated subculture. And I think a lot of communist groups in the United States are like that. I mean, they don't know what average people believe. They are just kind of disconnected, and they live in their own little bubble, and that's why they're so ineffective. Is they don't know how to reach the masses of people, and that's one of the dangers. And when these groups become isolated, they can also become very, rigid and authoritarian. And that's also a problem, and asserting more control over people's lives, and that's not good, right? I mean, and it's weird because on the one hand, at the end of the day, illiberalism means there is truth in the world. You're asserting that everything's not a matter of opinion. Some could argue that's very authoritarian. You're asserting that people should function in a disciplined manner and carry out the goals of the organization. Well, that's something important. But at the same time, there are differing layers of it, right? And I think it's important for any organization to keep their head clear, to keep in touch with the broader society, to not just live in a bubble. And on top of that, to treat people with dignity and not, financially take advantage of people, not act in a predatory manner. A lot of these groups that people describe as cults, there's some kind of sexual predatory behavior going on. The leaders sleeping with everybody, or people feel compelled to do things they didn't want to do and stuff. And obviously, there are signs of unhealthy organizations that exist out there. And unfortunately, a lot of the remaining little tiny communist groups in the United States are more or less cults. They're not in any of the cult books because they're not any good at it. They're so irrelevant and small. But at the same time, it's something to watch out for. It's something to watch out for, and but cult is a slur that is thrown at all kinds of people, right? I mean, Jason Unruhe announced on his channel recently that apparently my organization, that we believe I have the divine right to rule. That is not what our organization believes in any conceivable way. I mean, we have never said that. There are atheists. I would say it's a majority atheist group at this point. There are Christians, there are Muslims, and there are Jews. And, we put out this book as a way to relate to Christians, but it's not a Christian organization. And, the term cult gets thrown at any group. Any group, gets the label of cult, and it's just a way to dismiss things. And part of the cult scare, the cult obsession on Netflix, Part of that is just liberalism. Liberalism sees all illiberalism as somehow a threat. And so because of that, any illiberal organization is going to be called a cult. And that, some of these groups, and it gets weird because it's like, for example, right? Like, you had, I believe it was 1985, the MOVE bombing in Philadelphia, right? Well, the MOVE organization, this was a black revolutionary organization in Philadelphia that, they were centered around a charismatic leader. Yes, they did have some very, very specific beliefs. They were like super vegetarian and such, but, they didn't deserve to die, and they weren't bad people. I've met Pam Africa. I've met Ramona Africa. They're not bad people. They have some esoteric religious beliefs and whatever. And the government used the idea that they're a cult, to justify this horrendous bombing of their headquarters, right? Waco, right? Now, I'm obviously not in line with David Koresh's religious beliefs. I believe David Koresh was some kind of Christian Zionist. His group had lived in Israel for a while. They had like a very, very specific interpretation of the Bible and all of that. But the U.S. government didn't have the right to firebomb them. Look what the U.S. government did at Waco. It was horrendous. That didn't have to happen. That didn't have to happen, right? In the name of enforcing gun laws, they murdered, just like they murdered the MOVE organization in Philadelphia. They murdered these, these conservative evangelicals in Texas. Well, they shouldn't have murdered the evangelicals in Texas. They shouldn't have murdered the MOVE organization. And just labeling them a cult doesn't make it okay. And nowadays, anything can be a cult, right? I mean, it's weird. I remember when I was, again, we're getting back to ancient history here. I don't know why it always goes back here, but remember when I was a kid, I remember in my church library, not the actual public library, not the school library, but at the church library, they had this little room in my church called the church library. They had this book, and it was an old book. It was from like the 1940s, 1930s, and it was called The Four Major Cults. And the four major cults were Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventism, and I don't even remember what the other one was. Oh, Christian Science. And I looked at the book. Their definition of cult was very different. Cult just meant form of Christianity that is so different from other Christianity and so obscure that we don't really consider it to be real Christianity, right? They say, okay, Mormons, they have their own Bible and Joseph Smith and golden plates, so we consider them a cult. Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't believe Jesus was crucified on a cross, and they don't believe in heaven and hell and all that, so we consider them to be a cult. Christian Scientists don't take their kids to doctors. We consider them a cult. Seventh-day Adventists have church on Saturday and don't eat certain meats and follow Old Testament laws. So we don't, but it's like, there was nothing in that book I read, this book that was in my church library, about like they have authoritarian practices, they engage in thought control and brainwash. Nothing. That's not what cult meant back then. And in fact, the word in Spanish, the word for cult is secta, right? And I think that's what cult used to mean, right? In the English language, it used to mean sect, right? It just meant small religious group. If you go to the Middle East, there's a lot of these, right? We all know about Christianity, Islam, Judaism. In the Middle East, you have Alawites, right, who believe that the angel that was supposed to bring the message to the Prophet Muhammad was originally supposed to go to Ali, but it got confused. And they don't pray in mosques, they pray in their homes. You got Alawites, you got Yazidis, you got Druze. In the Middle East, you got all kinds of religious groups that are like, quote unquote, sects. It's like Christianity, it's like Judaism, it's like Islam, but it's like a curveball, right? And that's what generally the word cult used to mean. It's not until the 70s. In the 1970s in the United States, the word cult suddenly started meaning, group that gets together and drinks cyanide and all kills themselves in Guyana, or followers of Korean pastor who turns you into slaves to sell candles all day long or something like that. Right. And the American culture definition of cult is very, very weird. It's very, very weird. And again, it's rooted in the fact that it looks like, and that during the 70s or during the 50s and 60s, it looks like in order to fight communism, American intelligence was trying to build its own like groups of fanatics, right? And then in South Korea, you had the rise of the Reverend Sun Myung Moon. and you had other groups that formed during this time. It was like, in order to fight communism, they said, okay, these communists, they have groups of fanatics who will die for their cause. The CIA, American intelligence, Korean intelligence, other groups were doing experiments trying to figure out how can we make our own group of fanatics that will fight on our side against the communist fanatics. And as a result of that, you got some weird shit that happened, and it's still around. I mean, that's all there is to that. I mean, I could go on about that all night, but I guess you asked me what I think about mind control cults. That's what I think, right? I think that it's a concept that is very vague, that's not very well defined, and it could be applied to any liberal organization. So to some degree or other, the American definition of cult doesn't exist. However, there are rigid, authoritarian, exploitative organizations. A lot of them are tied to the American government, but a lot of them aren't. And there have always been obscure religious groups, sects, right? Those have always existed, right? For thousands of years, you've had religious groups that are not mainstream. And then on top of that, any group that becomes isolated from society, if a group feels like it's under attack, right? If a group feels like there are enemies all around them, they have the danger of becoming very internalized and cutting off from the rest of the outside world. And that can lead to not being in touch with reality and developing very rigid authoritarian practices. And that's what I always talk about with socialist countries, right? Socialist countries historically have been very authoritarian, right? North Korea is a very authoritarian place, right? China under Mao was very authoritarian. Soviet Union under Stalin was very authoritarian. Is that because communists are just evil and want to take away people's freedoms? No, it's because these societies were fighting for their lives, and they were up against all kinds of extreme threats, and like millions of people died in the Korean War, millions of people died in the Second World War, 27 million people in the Soviet Union died, and when groups are up against all those kinds of threats, when groups are up against all those kinds of threats, they have to tighten up and they have to become rigid. And the idea is that if we can get rid of imperialism, and if we can build a society where socialist countries are allowed to blossom into what they need to be, you won't see this kind of rigid authoritarianism develop, right? The idea is that countries will be allowed to just practice socialism in their own way. Anyway, I've given a really long answer to this question, but anyway, it was a 3-part question. CPI merch. Somebody's working on that right now. We have a proposal, and so somebody from CPI is talking to somebody else about somebody who made a proposal for CPI merch. So stay tuned. That's my answer to CPI merch. Stay tuned. All right. Next question. Effects on daily life if the dollar collapses. The price of food will go up. The price of anything imported will go up at that point, right? That's ultimately the main effect that will have. If the dollar devalues and collapses, also be prepared for a lot of the money. If you have savings, that savings will be rapidly devalued, right? If you have savings, the savings you have will be rapidly devalued. So yeah, the price of anything imported will go up. And if you have savings, the value of that savings will drastically decrease. Should try to build an imperfect version first. Isn't socialism imperfect by definition? All right, well, I'll write that down. Very good point. Isn't socialism perfect by definition? All righty. Lesser known leftist figures that everyone should know. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, an amazing organizer, built the IWW, the Wobblies, became a leader of the Communist Party later in her life, an Irish American woman from New York City, with an amazing voice, an amazing agitator. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn is definitely a communist hero that we don't know much about. Who else? Harry Haywood, right? The guy who wrote Black Bolshevik. He was a black nationalist, communist, leader of the African Blood Brotherhood, who joined the Communist Party and was the leader of their African American work during the 1930s, and eventually became a Maoist in the 70s. Harry Haywood is a very important figure. Who else? What are some other unknown American communist figures that are very, very important? Wow. There's Nelson Peary. I've always enjoyed Nelson Peary's writings, right? His 2 autobiographies, Black Fire and Black Radical, are very good. His book, The Future is Up to Us, has a very clear analysis of capitalism and the economics of capitalism. Yeah, I mean, he's really important. Who else? Yeah, Sam Marcy, right? I've done videos about Sam Marcy. Sam Marcy is a deeply influential American communist who a lot of people don't know about. He was the founder of the Workers' World Party. Most, PSL, Workers' World Party, a couple other breakaway splinter groups, they all have roots in Sam Marcy's tradition. So there you go. And, I mean, he was a guy who built a very, he built a very effective tanky communist group in the United States during the Cold War. A day in the life of a citizen look like in the communism you're advocating for? That's an odd. A day in the life of a citizen like the communism you are advocating for. On the list. All right. The next question. Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Well, there's a song about it. Up in Moscow, in the Kremlin, in the fall of 39. There's a Russian and a Prussian riding up the party line. Leon Trotsky was a Nazi, and we knew that for a fact. When Pravda said it, we all read it until the Stalin-Hitler pact. Now old Trotsky, once a Nazi, that was then the party line. But now the Nazis are hotsy-totsy, and Trotsky's setting British minds. No, that was a song that Trotskyites invented to make fun of the Communist Party USA after the 1939 pact. It's to the tune of My Darling Clementine. They call it My Darling Party Line. It's, look. The pact, the pact is a source of a lot of mockery of American communists. It was a lot of people quit the Communist Party over it. But ultimately, it was necessary. And the reason it was necessary was because the Soviet Union had gone to the United States and wanted to have a similar pact with the United States. The United States said no. The Soviet Union had gone to Britain and offered a similar kind of pact. Britain said no. The Soviet Union very briefly had such a pact with France, and then France betrayed it, so they didn't have it. And so as a result of that, and I guess another factor is Spain, right? Spain, which, the monarchy had been toppled. They had the Spanish Republic. It was like a progressive Popular Front government. The communists were a big part of the Spanish Republic and a big role in the Spanish government. And, fascist Franco had toppled the Spanish Republic and set up a fascist government. At that point, the Soviet Union said, okay, the Western powers, they let Spain completely fall to fascism. They refused to sign a pact with us. The Nazis, they might be willing to sign a pact with us. And so they did it because they needed some protection. Should the working class save and invest their money? And they needed some protection against, World War II, which was starting, and they knew the Nazis had promised they would invade and destroy the Soviet Union. They were quite nervous about it, and they saw World War II on the brink of breaking out, and so, in order to buy time, they signed a pact, and they knew that it wouldn't be kept. They knew that. There's a very good book by Anna Louise Strong called "The Soviets Expected It." They knew that the Nazis were probably going to break the pact. And a lot of the things they say about the pact are not true. For example, they claim that the Nazis and the Soviet Union invaded Poland together. That is false. What happened is the Nazis invaded Poland. They toppled the Polish government. The Polish government fell, went into exile. And then the communists, seeing they had drawn this line down Europe, and it was the Nazis' army will not go on this side, the Soviet army will not go on this side. Based on that, the Soviet Union said, okay, they invaded Poland after they said they wouldn't invade Poland. We're going to move our troops right up to the line. And so that's what they did. And there's a famous handshake. They did shake hands, the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union basically said, look, if the Nazis moved into Poland, which they said they wouldn't do, they better not cross the line. And it was basically a message to the Nazis, don't cross the line. And they moved their troops up to the line. And if you want proof that it was not a joint invasion, the Polish government in exile never declared war on the Soviet Union. Never. The Polish government in exile declared war on the Nazis. They set up a government in exile in Britain. but they never declared war on the Soviet Union. So if it had been a joint invasion, if Stalin and Hitler had both sat down and said, let's invade Poland together, then the Polish government in exile would have declared war on both of them. But it didn't. It declared war on the Nazis because it was the Nazis who had invaded Poland, and the Soviet Union, seeing that the Polish government had collapsed, moved their troops right up to the line. So a lot of the things they say about the pact are not true. U.S. media used the pact as an opportunity to push all kinds of crazy stuff. Like they claimed, they started calling the communists the communazis, etc. But it was not an alliance. It was a non-aggression pact. It was, the idea was, we drew this line down Europe, and the Nazis won't cross this side of it, and the Soviets won't cross this side of it. And eventually the Nazis broke it. And then they did cross it. And then the Soviet Union had a war with them. So, I mean, people who use that pact as proof, I don't even know what people are trying to say that. So there you go. So there you go. And that's all there is to that. So there you go. I don't know the specifics about this line or whatever, but there you go. All right. Can I be a Marxist and a Christian? I made a video about this, right? Jordan Peterson, did this whole like, no, you can't, and like mocking the idea of it. Look, okay, if you want to be like a 100% true Marxist, follow exactly what Karl Marx said. If you want to be absolutely 100% in line with everything Karl Marx ever said, no, right? Karl Marx was an atheist, and his dialectical materialist worldview was non-religious, right? Says that there is no spiritual power in the universe. All that exists is matter, and that matter is constantly in a state of motion. However, if you look at the global Marxist movement today, right? Fidel Castro, in his final years of his life, he was a Christian. Fidel Castro, met with the Pope, started quoting the Bible, and Fidel Castro became a Christian in the final years of his life. Nicaragua is a Christian socialist government, right? The slogan of the government is Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. Nicolas Maduro is Roman Catholic. Hugo Chavez is Roman Catholic. The Communist Party of Russia, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, which is a huge political party, is led by a Christian. The leader of it, Gennady Zhuganov, is a Christian. And in many Russian Orthodox churches, you will find pictures of Stalin. Stalin is loved by the Russian Orthodox Church because he's considered a defender of the homeland, standing up against the Western values and the invaders and the Nazis, standing up for the people of Russia. And, more people go to church on Sunday morning in China than in any other country in the world. That is a fact. Now, it's because China's a bigger country, but church attendance in China is massive. Now, obviously, there are some churches that come into, clash with the Chinese government, but there are many Chinese Roman Catholics, there are many Chinese Protestants, and church attendance in China is very high. So, I mean, you asked specifically about Christianity and communism. At this point, in the 21st century, they walk hand in hand for the most part. But I guess, yes, if you want to be specific to what Karl Marx taught, yes, Karl Marx was a straight up 100% materialist atheist. However, the global communist movement at this point, where communists are in power, where they have massive parties, they are friendly to Christianity. So, I hope that answers your question. I've got a lot of videos on this. The reason that Marxism is so hostile to religion is largely because Marxism originated in the revolutions to bring down feudalism. And feudalism, you have a state church preaching the divine right of kings, etc. And so religion's role under feudalism is very different than, nowadays you can go to whatever church you want, etc. But there you go. All right. Next question. China and the World Economic Forum. China wants investors. China depends on foreign investment. That's how they've raised millions of people out of poverty, is they've brought foreign investment in to aid their socialist system. They've controlled the economy. They have 5-year economic plans. They have state-run industries. They need foreign investment. And the World Economic Forum is a place to discuss ideas, and China wants to be part of that conversation. I believe the World Economic Forum generally is a platform for attacking Marxists, or for attacking China. I believe that's where Soros and others just get up and give anti-China speeches and stuff. But they want to be part of those conversations to set the terms of global trade. It makes sense. And, socialist countries are always demanding the right. The imperialists are always saying free trade. We love free trade, unless you're communist, unless you're China, unless you're Russia, unless you're Cuba, unless you're Venezuela. All of a sudden, they don't love free trade. They love free trade on their terms. But if you have a government of action that fights for working families, they don't want free trade anymore. So the fact that China is able to participate in the World Economic Forum, the fact that their companies can trade with them and the sanctions haven't gotten in the way of it, we should demand that China and all socialist countries, we should demand and protect their right to be part of the World Economic Forum. Saudi Arabia is selling oil in yen. Yep. And yuan, the Chinese yuan. Yep. That means the petrodollar is not going to be with us much longer, and that the dollar might be on its way out in dominance. So there you go. And that's because of U.S. imperialism being in decline, the emerging economy, the new Silk Road, etc. Is CPI basically 21st century socialism for America? Sure. Yeah. The idea is to come up with a coherent program that people could understand, to build a mass movement to inspire people in the United States to move beyond capitalism. 21st century socialism, right? Socialism for our time. Very good. All right. Yeah, 21st century socialism for America. That sounds about right. Yeah, I can believe in that. Check out our website, cpiusa.org. All right. Are hippies a creation of the CIA? No. Well, there's elements of the CIA that enhanced hippie counterculture, like Project MK Ultra that promoted hallucinogens, like the Congress for Cultural Freedom program that promoted this kind of like middle class leftism that's about deconstruction. But you're always going to have non-conforming intellectuals in society. You're always going to have kind of a middle class bohemian trend. You're always going to have that. Okay. And I talk about, if you go and watch the Saxton lectures, because in the Saxton lectures, I talk about how, I talk about the revolutionary intelligentsia. The second part of the Saxton lectures, section 2, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4 are all about this question, right? Where did the synthetic left come from? First, I talk about the revolutionary intelligentsia, this middle class current that is always around in capitalist society, that was, that very much was part of the French Revolution and the bourgeois revolutions, where you find, anarchism and socialism and communism, but you also find occultism, you also find Freudian psychoanalysis, you also find all kinds of stuff, right? And that this is the revolutionary intelligentsia, you can call it, is a middle class current that exists in modern capitalist societies and has always existed. And it's where Marxism originated. But in the process of the 20th century, it left the revolutionary intelligentsia and went to the masses. And like Lenin was the beginning of that. And then with Stalin, it got even further. And nowadays, the revolutionary intelligentsia has largely been weaponized by imperialism. The aesthetics of the revolutionary intelligentsia largely serve imperialism. However, Marxism did originate among the revolutionary intelligentsia, and that's a whole conversation. But, what you call hippies, counterculture, yes, American intelligence has manipulated it, enhanced some of its more negative attributes. But you're always going to have some current like that, right? You're going to have non-conforming intellectuals. And that's good, right? You need free-thinking people. You need people that don't conform, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But some of the anti-populist tendencies of that current, I think, have been enhanced by American intelligence. All right. Ukraine-Russia war and its impact on Israel. Well, the fact that Israel is not all in with the United States on that is big, right? There were a lot of Russian-speaking Israelis who, are not big fans of the Palestinians, not big fans of Iran or Syria, but like Russia. And when the United States says, "Oh, Russia is the most evil country," they're like, "You sure about that?" There's a lot of Russian-speaking Israelis, and the fact that Israel wasn't all in with the United States on their anti-Russia campaign, that's big, right? And it shows the Democratic Party is getting further away from Israel. The Netanyahu Party in Israel is getting further from the United States. There is the moderate wing of Israeli politics and the Republican wing of U.S. politics, that would like to have a better relationship between the two, but it appears that in Israel, in order for Israel to survive, they need the hard right wing. They need the settlers, the Netanyahu people. The base of, Netanyahu's base tend to be lower income Israelis, a lot of whom are, oh, and thank you, Lainey. Thank you. Shout out to you and Hard Lens Media. Netanyahu's base tend to be a lot of lower Israelis that have lower incomes than most Israelis. That a lot of them tend to be from Russia or from Eastern Europe, not all of them, and they tend to be involved in settlement activity, right? Whereas it's Israelis that are involved in the areas that are within the 1967 borders, they tend to be more liberal. And in order for Israel to keep existing, they need this hard right wing, these settlers, right? These settlers who go out on the settlements and are big fanatical Netanyahu supporters and really hate Palestinians. And the more fanatical the Israeli hardliners are essential to Israel. However, the Israeli hardliners are less willing to play ball with what the United States wants. And so we're seeing that tension increasing. And it seems like the Democratic Party seems to feel like Israel, in a lot of ways, hurts the interests of the United States in dominating the world. It seems like the Netanyahu forces in Israel feel like the United States is holding back Israel, and it's kind of, the Israel being dependent on U.S. aid weakens Israel somehow. So there's tension in that relationship. And the fact that Israel is at this point not willing to break with Russia, that shows, that there's trouble in paradise, as they say, that it's not, the relationship between these two countries is not going well. That said, though, Israel still is dependent on U.S. aid, and even almost all of the Democrats favor. I mean, even the Squad favors continued aid to Israel, though they may criticize it. So the relationship is not going to end anytime soon, but it shows that there is tension in that relationship for sure. Next question. All right. Why did anti-imperialism never take off in Mexico? My friend, you are mistaken. Prior to the Second World War, there was kind of a Bonapartist populist government in Mexico that, gave refuge to Trotsky and gave aid to the Spanish Republic. And, there was a strong socialist working class movement in Mexico. And today, I mean, the current president of Mexico, AMLO, he comes out of teachers union struggles, and he's not a full-on socialist. He leads kind of a popular front government. There is a communist party that is in his government, and they're called the PT, or the Workers' Party. But AMLO is much more anti-imperialist. He recognizes Maduro and supports Maduro. Basically, he's friendly to Russia and China. He's critical of the United States. He didn't immediately congratulate Trump. He thought maybe it was a stolen election in the United States. So I think there is a lot of anti-imperialism in Mexico. The thing is, Mexico's right on the border with the United States, right? Cuba is, an island, and the USA was totally freaked out by the Cuban Revolution. Mexico is a much bigger country right on the U.S. border. So you have to remember the USA, and especially the Cuban military, the Cuban intelligence agencies, and the Cuban police, they're trained by the United States, and a lot of them are very loyal to the USA. The Mexican deep state is very much like a wing of the American deep state. Okay, AMLO can be a progressive, can be anti-imperialist. You can have, the Workers' Party represented in the government, but that Mexican deep state, their guns come from America, their training comes from America, and that's a big factor. And that's what the point Lenin makes in his book, The State and Revolution, is it's all about the state at the end of the day, right? It's about the military, it's about the policing agencies, it's about the intelligence agencies. And, Mexico is very much controlled in that way. So there you go. Native American communist movements. Well, you could argue the Native Americans were always communist, right? Because, in a lot of the way that they had their economic system prior to the arrival of the West, of colonialism, prior to the arrival of the Europeans, was very communistic. Now, the Aztecs, they were practicing slavery. They had the slave system in Mexico. But, among the tribes, the hunter-gatherer tribes of the Americas, of the United States, what is now the United States, they did practice a form of primitive communism, right? Of hunter-gatherer civilization. They were hunting for a living. They were gathering for a living. So you could argue they were always communists. Now, there was something called the American Indian Movement, AIM, that was formed during the 1970s. And AIM was like a Native American rights activist group. And AIM aligned itself with the Black Panthers. They had meetings with the Black Panthers. And they did very provocative things. They seized the Bureau of Indian Affairs building in Washington, D.C. They seized, Alcatraz Island in California. and they were a very militant group. They had armed standoffs with the U.S. government. Wounded Knee. They had an armed standoff in the 1970s at Wounded Knee. And they're an indigenous activist group. They existed. Unfortunately, in the 70s, they were attacked in the same way that a lot of the progressive groups coming out of the 70s were attacked. And there was I think a woman who was killed. Anna Mae Aquash was found dead, and a lot of the Native American activists blamed each other for that. There were accusations about that, and then this guy Russell Means, who was the leader of the American Indian movement, he just became a CIA sellout. Right, he started doing propaganda for the U.S. government in Nicaragua. He made propaganda against in support of the Contras. He started hanging out with the Unification Church and the CIA, and ultimately Russell Means, who was one of the main leaders of the American Indian movement, became a CIA asset. He just became an ally of imperialism, and he was a libertarian presidential candidate, and he had kind of this weird hippie. A lot of white hippie people started following him and reading his books and stuff, but Russell Means ultimately became, an agent of imperialism. But there were a lot of Native American activists who didn't, right? I mean, and so the American Indian movement, AIM, was a revolutionary movement. Was it Marxist? No, it rejected Marxism. It argued Marxism was a European ideology, but it aligned itself with the Black Panthers. It aligned itself with the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. They supported anti-imperialist struggles around the world. So, I mean, AIM, you could argue, and there were a lot of AIM, not a lot, but a number of AIM activists who did become full-on communists. That did happen. There were some AIM people, Native activists, who joined the Workers' World Party. There were some AIM people who joined the Revolutionary Communist Party. The RCP actually had a long-standing tension with the American Indian movement. If you read any of the writings of Ward Churchill, who's this Native American scholar at University of Colorado, every one of his books has a dig at the Bobavakian people, at the RCP, because in the 70s, the RCP recruited a lot of Native American activists, and they fought with the American Indian movement. And, there's a lot of, tension, I guess, and hostility between Russell Means and his people, who ended up being CIA, and the Bobavakian RCP people, because they were recruiting them. And some of the writing that the RCP did was a little bit insensitive, right? There's a book called Marxism and Native Americans. It's like a compilation of essays written by Ward, put out by Ward Churchill. And there's an essay by the Revolutionary Communist Party in that compilation that is a little bit insensitive. It's like they're denying the numbers of Native Americans who died. They're criticizing the Native American movement because it wants to maintain its primitive economy, and instead of wanting full-on socialism. And these things are complicated, but there are a number of indigenous folks who joined various communist groups. That's a fact. But then the American Indian movement, AIM, was like the biggest. That was the revolutionary Native American current of the 70s. Those were radical Native Americans that did very radical and heroic things to fight for the rights of Native Americans. Leonard Peltier is still in federal prison. They charged him for killing FBI agents, when many people have looked at the case and they've said it was friendly fire, that there was a standoff, but it was the FBI agents shot the other FBI agents. It wasn't his gun that killed the FBI agents. It was the FBI agents shot each other. But he's in federal prison for the rest of his life. Leonard Peltier, a Native American activist. Little known fact, Bill Clinton was talking about freeing Leonard Peltier. I think because George Soros wanted Leonard Peltier to be free. Some other Native American, some other donors to Bill Clinton who liked Native American causes wanted Leonard Peltier to be free. So Bill Clinton announced he was considering freeing Leonard Peltier. And then the FBI director, Louis Frey, brought hundreds of FBI agents to protest outside the White House, threatening. It was basically a threat on Bill Clinton. If you have a federal security agency assembling hundreds of their members outside of the White House, that's a threat on the president's life. That's what that is. And so all these FBI agents assembled outside of the White House, hundreds of them, led by the FBI director, Louis Frey, and Bill Clinton backed down and didn't free Leonard Peltier. Absolutely, absolutely disgusting moment. But it shows you, again, the state. I mean, that's who ultimately has the power. And FBI director Louis Frey, they intimidated Bill Clinton out of freeing Leonard Peltier. There you go. It's pretty wild, pretty wild. But yeah, I mean, that happened, and a lot of people don't remember that incident. It's kind of obscured, but look into the details. I mean, it's a really wild thing that the FBI basically threatened a sitting president. You better not free. You better not free. You know, is that true? Oh, okay. I've never heard that, Peter. But if that's true, neat. I did not know that. I did not know that. That's pretty wild. Um, I never knew that. That's a pretty wild story. There you go. There you go. All right. Excuse me. Excuse me. Spring allergies. That's why my face was so red yesterday on Jimmy Dore. Anyway, isn't socialism imperfect by definition? Yes, right? Right? Socialism is the transition to the higher stage of communism. Um, and yes, socialism is by definition imperfect. Yes. And this idea, a lot of middle class trends, Trotskyites, anarchists have it in their head. If I don't like it, if there's something about it I don't like, it's not really socialism. If a socialist government has a policy I don't approve of, it's not socialism. If a socialist government does something that's unfair, it's not really socialism. Malarkey. Socialism is an economic relationship, right? And most of the countries, in fact, all of the countries that have adopted socialism so far have done it on the basis of poverty. They've been underdeveloped countries in the third world that, in order to break out of imperialism, have had to move towards socialism. And they've done amazing things. The Soviet Union rapidly industrialized, wiped out illiteracy, electrified the whole country, defeated the Nazis, invented space travel. I mean, doubled the life expectancy. They did amazing things, but they were coming from a place of extreme poverty. China. Wow. Now they've gone from being the sick man of Asia to being the, at this point, they are the second largest economy in the world. 800 million people lifted from poverty. I mean, full on industrialization, world's largest, hydroelectrical power plants, world's largest steel producer. I mean, the gains have been massive. What these countries have achieved has been amazing, right? These countries have come from the lowest levels of poverty. And by having a rationally planned socialist economy, they've achieved amazing things. But of course, they've been more authoritarian than they would have preferred. I want there to be more freedom in society, but unfortunately, if you're in a situation where you're building socialism on the basis of poverty and under the attack by the imperialists, you're going to adopt a more authoritarian method. That's true. And on top of that, you have a situation where I mean, these countries, they've still got a lot of the beliefs. I mean, look, Stalin compromised. The Soviet system. The Soviet system was largely a compromise with the peasantry, right? Because you had the very radical Bolsheviks. A lot of them were very middle class and very Europeanized. And then you had the deeply conservative Russian peasantry, who were deeply conservative. And what Stalin did, it was a synthesis, right? The Soviet family. Women got education. Women served in the military. Women worked full-time jobs. But, abortion was outlawed at one point during Stalin's leadership. Women could get divorced. Women voted. You had sex education in schools and stuff, but at the same time, homosexuality was not tolerated in a lot of ways. So again, it was a compromise. Originally, when the Bolsheviks came into power in 1917, they tried to go hard on with this like very, very radical free love stuff, right? They talked about abolishing marriage. They talked about all kinds of stuff. And Lenin actually at one point spoke up and said, this has gone too far. Clara Zetkin, the German communist, actually interviewed Lenin about it. And he said, I'm really not happy with what these young Bolsheviks are doing. Their way that they're being free with sexuality is a little bit too much. There was something going around called the glass of water theory. And some of the Bolsheviks were saying that having sex in the new society will be as meaningless as drinking a glass of water on a hot day. Lenin said that's malarkey and that's dangerous. That's irresponsible. That's not proletarian morality. You can't act that way. And Lenin was even saying this has gone too far. And when Stalin ascended to power, right, 1928 is when Stalin really secured his leadership. Stalin reached a compromise where they had what they called the Soviet family: a mom, a dad, kids. The mom is working, the dad is working. They're having as many kids as they can because they want to raise the population. If the mom has more than 10 kids, she gets a medal for being a mother of the Soviet Union. That was a compromise. And that was very radical to have women getting education, to have women voting, to have women serving as leaders of the military. That was very, very radical at the time. And for the peasantry, that was a big deal. Oh my gosh, we're letting women do this. But compared to what a lot of the Bolsheviks, like Alexandria Kollontai, right? She was this very radical Bolshevik who actually like spent a lot of her life living in New Jersey, I guess, which is kind of weird. But Alexandria Kollontai, she wanted to abolish marriage. She was all about homosexuality being legal. She was, she was very conservative. You know what I mean? It's a balance, right? And that in order for the Bolsheviks to stay in power, in order for the Soviet Union to stay in power, they had to keep the peasantry happy. And if they'd continued with their radical social liberalism, the peasants would have turned against them. However, they did a lot to advance women's rights. It was a compromise. And a lot of times the socialist countries, that's what it is, right? It's again, you have very deeply conservative populations that have been living in traditional conservative ways for thousands of years. And if a bunch of rich college radicals take over the government and announce, all right, we're going to have free love, everybody, then those people say, oh, no, you don't. Family and tradition is so important to me. I'm not going along with that. And that a lot of times socialist governments have to compromise, right? Cuba has done an amazing turnaround on the issue of homosexuality. Amazing turnaround, right? When the Cuban Revolution first came to power, they were very homophobic, right? They thought they said homosexuality doesn't exist in Cuba. If you ever went to Cuba and there was a tour guide, he'd say, we don't have that here. That's a bourgeois decadence problem. In Western capitalist countries, you have gays. We don't have those here. And one thing that happened, a lot of people will tell you that Cuba had labor camps for homosexuals. That's not exactly right. It's kind of right, but it's not exactly right. What it was is if you were gay, you weren't allowed to serve in the military. They had don't ask, don't tell. And in Cuba, there were Jehovah's Witnesses. They weren't allowed to serve in the military. Other people weren't allowed to serve in the military. So if you didn't serve in the military, you had to do labor. You had to do like field work, basically. You had to do labor. That was the other option. And there was a lot of bullying of people that did labor. And they had a policy. So if you were a Jehovah's Witness and you didn't want to serve in the military, you would have to go like cut sugarcane or whatever. But there was like bullying, like you're not a real man, you're a pansy or whatever because you're not serving in the military. And then anyone who was found out to be gay was forced to do labor. And then there was a lot of degrading and humiliation towards those people who did the labor. So you can argue that was, again, because homosexuals were not allowed in the military and they were forced to do labor, they were facing discrimination. But in the 80s, Cuba started to change its politics. And in the 90s, Fidel Castro actually apologized for that and said, we were really wrong in the way we treated gay people. Now Cuba has one of the most inclusive LGBT education systems in the world. Their education about sex, their sex education schools is very, very radical and liberal. They provide free transgender surgery to anyone who wants it. And on top of that, in Cuba, they have really, really done a lot to advance the LGBT community. They've had ad campaigns, and the Young Communist League will intervene in family struggles. If a parent is being homophobic toward their child, the Young Communist League will intervene and counsel the family about why they need to treat their LGBT child with respect. They've really taken great advances. And it was Mariela Castro, who I've met. There's a photograph of me with Mariela Castro. Mariela Castro, I believe, is the daughter of Raul Castro. She was one of the main proponents of LGBT rights, and she did a speaking tour during the Obama years. She actually did a speaking tour across the U.S. showing Cuba's reforms on the LGBT question. So, that's big. That's very, very big. The fact that, that Cuba changed. You have to remember, first of all, most of the communist world, from about the 1930s up until about the 1980s, most communists in the world felt that homosexuality was bourgeois decadence, right? They just felt it was a disease of capitalism. It was a deviation. And this is a myth that goes back, right, for a long time. This is a belief, right? In times where people didn't openly talk about homosexuality, back when it was kind of whispered about, a lot of people thought of homosexuality as being this like rich people hobby, right? This thing that rich people, they have wild parties and they get drunk and all of that, and they're having so much regular sex, they're bored, so they try out homosexuality, right? That was the attitude, right? People read about ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and they say, oh, this is the decadent rich. This is a thing that the decadent rich do. right? And that's why the idea that most communists had, which was, that the Soviet Union put out there, that China put out there, that homosexuality is quote unquote bourgeois decadence. It's this thing that rich people do. It's this behavior that rich people do that shows that they're disgusting and immoral. Right? Well, that's not true. That's wrong, right? I mean, that's just not the case, right? That there's plenty of working class people that are gay, and there always has been. Rich people are safer in being gay, right? That I mean, if a working class person says they're gay, they might lose their job. They could be beaten up or whatever. But if you're wealthy enough, there's ways you can get away with, and that's always been true. Even when homosexuality was like a serious crime, rich people got away with it, and so there's an element of class privilege in that. But at the same time, Cuba has come around on that issue. Now, there's not gay marriage in Cuba. They do not have gay marriage because, there's enough people in Cuba that are Christian. It's actually because of Baptists. There's a lot of Baptists in Cuba. You wouldn't realize this. You'd think it's a communist country that Christians are persecuted. There are a lot of Baptists, Baptist Christians in Cuba who are against homosexuality. And believe it or not, Cuba is a democracy. People do get to vote, and the reason the Cuban Parliament and the Cuban National Assembly has not approved gay marriage is largely because of Baptists. But they have equal rights for domestic partnerships. They have LGBT inclusive education. They provide free transgender surgery to anyone who wants it. Cuba has really come around on that issue. So, again, it's always a compromise, and that's the thing. And so socialism is always going to be imperfect, right? Because it's socialism, right? And so this idea that a country does something you don't agree with, so therefore it's not socialism, that is a silly, problematic view, and that's not scientific. And that these countries with socialism have had great improvements in their policies and such. So what would the day in the life of a citizen be like in the communism you are advocating for? Well, here's the thing, all right? I hope that the person who asked that question is still on here. I know it took me a while to get through these questions. This is an important question because I can't tell you that because I'm not a utopian, right? I'm not advocating for like some ideal world that I can like draw sketches of and show you exactly what it looks like. I'm advocating for society to take control of the means of production and have the economy be rationally planned and controlled so that growth is no longer restrained. And then I'm advocating for eventually that growth and human creativity and invention to get to such heights that we have a world beyond anything we can imagine. A world where there's so much abundance that there is no inequality, so much abundance that there's no need for a government, no need for a state, so much abundance that basically all coercion, all division between mental and manual labor fades away. And Bigfoot says, thanks for the awesome answer. Well, there you go. So because of that, like socialism is a transition, and it begins when the banks, factories, and industries, the centers of economic power, are organized to serve public good and not the profits of a wealthy few. When you have an economy that is organized to serve the people, that's socialism. And socialism is a road. It's a process, right? And it's a process that ultimately culminates in the whole world becoming socialist and eradicating scarcity and eventually achieving that ultimate goal of a world without any scarcity and poverty. And in such a world, divisions and hierarchies would break down. So if I were to tell you, you're probably asking me to describe like China, to describe North Korea. And that's why a lot of Americans fall into this trap. They look at North Korea, and life in North Korea is very hard compared to life in the United States. They say, well, I don't want that. Well, neither do the North Koreans. They don't want that either. They're using socialism to try and get out of that. And the first step on the road to getting out of the extreme poverty forced on Korea and forced onto China and forced onto Russia by Western imperialism is taking control of their own economies. And they've had socialism in order to do that. But they are trying to build up abundance, and they're trying to get beyond that. So if I pointed to North Korea and said, that's my ideal, I would be a buffoon. I would not be speaking like a Marxist because that's not the ideal, right? That is an advance over what was there before, and it's the Korean people advancing, but that's not the ideal. They don't want to be in a state of military siege. They don't want to have the sanctions that prevent them from getting needed goods. They want to be trading with the rest of the world. They want to be able to loosen up and be a more open and free society, but they're not. And the same for China, and the same for Cuba, and the same for Vietnam, and the same for Nicaragua. And socialism is a process. It's a process that begins by abolishing capitalist property relations, having an economy organized to serve public good. And with socialism, you can begin the process of eradicating scarcity, lifting people out of poverty, reorganizing your economy. But no socialist society is the ideal. It's by definition not the ideal. And the ideal, the ultimate goal of communism is something so far beyond anything we can imagine. So far beyond anything we can imagine, right? Try explaining today to caveman, right? You went back to a caveman. Go to a caveman and be like, hey, caveman, so in the society I live in, we have this thing called gyms. And the caveman would look at you blankly, be like, what? Be like, yeah, that people, they don't sweat enough. They don't lift heavy things enough. So we have this special place where people go to sweat, and to lift heavy things. And the caveman would be like, what? The caveman could never imagine such a thing because he has to lift heavy things and he has to run around and sweat all day long just to barely get enough to survive. And his life expectancy is like 25. So if you explain to a caveman that we have this thing called gyms where people exercise, he's going to look at you and that's going to be far beyond anything he can comprehend. The reality that we live in is so different than what hunter-gatherer civilization was that it would be beyond, it wouldn't make any sense. The caveman would be like, and you lift heavy weights and then you put them down and you don't have to, and like try explaining. And I mean, you gyms would be even beyond anything he could comprehend. Lights, electric lights. He'd be like, so you have little suns in your house? Like, he would have no idea. And if you tried to explain to the caveman, yeah, well, we have this problem of, it would just be like, you went back in time, you built a time machine, you got a caveman, and you just put him in the world that we currently live in, his brain would probably explode. Like, he would probably just, like, he wouldn't be able to comprehend it, right? His brain had developed in a reality that was one way. And, he would be looking at a reality that's so vastly different. He would not even know what to do, right? And that's what communism, how different communism is. We cannot imagine. Can you imagine a world where nobody has to work? Nobody, not anybody. That's what communism is. When labor becomes life's prime want and not a necessity. That's what Marx writes about in Critique of the Goethe Program. People need to read Critique of the Goethe Program. When labor becomes life's prime want, meaning this is a world where nobody, not just the rich people, don't have to work. Nobody has to work because technology has advanced so much and there's so much stuff being produced that nobody has to work and that people work only to entertain themselves. That's beyond anything we can imagine. We cannot imagine a world where nobody has to work, where labor becomes life's prime want. People work because they feel like doing it. That is so beyond anything. This is something that's hundreds and probably thousands of years in the future, right? And that is the ultimate ideal. That is when there is no more class struggle. That's when there is no more social hierarchy and there is no scarcity. And that is the ultimate ideal. And that is going to be beyond anything we can even possibly comprehend. And it probably won't be restrained to this planet. It'll probably be all throughout the galaxy, right? This is like, we're talking about, there's that book that some guy wrote, fully automated luxury gay space communism. It's going to be beyond anything, right? And that's why I get all nitpicky when people say, oh, abolish billionaires. No, abolish exploitation, abolish the irrational system of capitalism. But should working class people save and invest their money? I don't know. I'm not a financial advisor. I don't give financial advice. It's always good to have savings, right? But at the same time, what if the dollar collapses and all your savings go away? And look at the stock market, 2008, 2009, so, I'm not here to give you financial advice. Ultimately, the only way we can really secure that growth is unlimited and unrestrained by the irrational cycle of the market is to have socialism. So if you're looking for like personal financial advice, I'm not the guy to talk to. But anyway, folks, it's been fun. It's been a great stream. I always enjoy engaging with all of you. Thank you for all these super chats. Thank you, folks who came on and chatted for a while. That was really awesome. And it's been fun. So I think we're going to end it here. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, folks. Good night. It's always a pleasure to interact with you. Always fun. Have a good night. We need a government of action that will fight for working families.